Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was a dragon god who trained the legendary hero, Naruto x Rikka Takarada. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. An anomaly in the everyday. The rain wasn't merely falling, it was a siege. It hammered the pavement of Tsutsujidai, turning the neon glow of convenience store signs and vending machines into slick, impressionist. I-see watercolor paintings that bled across the asphalt. Each drop that struck the clear vinyl of Rikka Takarada's umbrella was a percussive pop, a tiny explosion in the city's cacophonous, waterlogged symphony. The air was thick enough to drink, a humid cocktail of summer heat, damp concrete, and the exhaust fumes from a passing bus that hissed as its tires sliced through the accumulating puddles. Tea was the kind of evening that made you feel like you were wading through the world rather than walking through it. Seriously, though, are you even listening? Namiko's voice, tinny and slightly distorted, crackled from the smartphone pressed against Rikka's ear. I'm telling you, Utsumi totally froze up when I asked her about the festival. It was legendary. Rikka shifted her school bag on her shoulder, the leather strap slick with moisture. I'm listening, she said, her own voice feeling distant. A pebble dropped into the vast well of the city's noise. Utsumi, freezing up, got it. She was, in fact, only half listening. The other half of her attention was adrift, snagged on the way the blue light from a pharmacy sign shimmered on a river of rainwater rushing towards a storm drain. It was beautiful, in a lonely sort of way. You're doing it again, Namiko sighed, the sound punctuated by a burst of static. That thing where you check out. You're physically here, but your brain is, like, on a different channel. Sorry, Rikka mumbled, and she meant it. She tried to focus, to pull her consciousness back into the small, warm circle of her friendship. She pictured Namiko on the other end, probably sprawled on her bed, gesturing emphatically to an empty room as she recounted her day. She pictured Hass, who was likely on the group chat, sending a barrage of stickers that vaguely related to the conversation. They were good friends. They were her world, so why did she so often feel like she was observing it all from behind a thick pane of glass? Anyway, Namiko continued, oblivious to the existential gulf that had just opened and closed in Rikka's mind. We're all still on for Café Septième tomorrow after school, right? Their new melon pan special is supposed to be insane. Yeah, of course, Rikka said, forcing a brightness into her tone. The Café Septième, it was their spot. A cozy little place with worn wooden floors, the constant scent of roasting coffee beans, and a perpetually sleepy cat named Latte who would let you scratch its ears if you were lucky. It was a comfortable constant in her life. Wouldn't miss it. They said their goodbyes, and Rikka slid the phone back into her pocket. The conversation, which should have grounded her, had only amplified the strange sense of detachment. She watched her own reflection in a dark shop window, a ghost in a plaid skirt and blazer. Her face obscured by the cascade of water over the glass. She looked like a part of the scenery, as temporary and unremarkable as the rain itself. This feeling wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was a hollowness. It was the quiet, persistent hum of a question she didn't know how to ask, a feeling that the life she was living was a well-rehearsed play, and she was an understudy who had been thrust onto the stage without ever having read the script. Every day was a cycle of school, friends, homework, sleep. It was a good life. A normal life, and it was suffocating her. She took a different route home. A subconscious rebellion against the familiar. A turn down a narrow side street she usually ignored, a path that ran behind the main commercial drag. Here, the neon glare was muted. The sounds of traffic softened to a distant roar. The rain seemed louder, drumming on corrugated metal awnings and gurgling in unseen drainpipes. The air smelled different, cleaner, with an undercurrent of wet earth from the small, neglected potted plants someone had left on a fire escape. It was in this alley, halfway between the familiar world and somewhere else, that she saw it. It was a shop, or rather, the memory of a shop. It was squeezed between a drab, concrete apartment building and a shuttered laundromat, in a space that Rikka would have sworn didn't exist a moment before. The facade was made of a dark, almost black wood, the grain so deep it seemed to swallow the dim light. A single, Large window displayed not merchandise, but a swirling, mesmerizing vortex of deep blue and silver dust, like a captured galaxy. Above the door, a small, elegantly carved sign hung from a wrought iron bracket. It read, "The Hourglass." The name was not painted on, but seemed to be a part of the wood itself. As if it had grown there. Rikka stopped. Her umbrella tilted, letting a stream of cold water run down her neck, but she didn't notice. She had walked this way hundreds of times. She knew this alley. It was a shortcut she took when she was late. There was no shop here. There was a graffiti-covered wall, a stack of old newspapers that were perpetually damp, and a bent bicycle frog. Me that had been chained to a railing for years. And yet, here it was. It felt less like it had been built and more like it had simply occurred. As if the world had folded in on itself for a moment. This place had been pressed into the crease. An inexplicable pull, a curiosity so potent it felt like a physical force, drew her forward. It was a stupid idea. It was late, raining, and this was definition of a strange place in a dark alley. Every instinct for self-preservation she possessed screamed at her to turn around, to go back to the brightly lit main street and the comforting predictability of her route home. But the hollowness inside her, the quiet ache for something, anything different, was stronger. It propelled her forward, one step at a time, until she was standing before the heavy wooden door. There was no handle, only a small, brass representation of an Ouroboros, a serpent eating its own tail, set into the wood. Hesitantly, she reached out and pressed her finger into the center of the serpent. The door did not click or unlatch. It simply swung inward, smoothly and silently, opening into a pocket of impossible quiet. The moment she stepped across the threshold, the roar of the city vanished. The relentless drumming of the rain, the hiss of tires, the distant wail of a siren, all of it was gone, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to have weight. The air inside was cool and dry, carrying a scent that was at once alien and deeply familiar. It smelled of old paper and leather-bound books, of beeswax and polished wood, of ozone after a lightning strike. And something else, something ancient and clean, like the air at the top of a mountain or the deep, cold heart of a desert at midnight. The door swung shut behind her with a soft, final thud, sealing her inside. The interior of the hourglass was larger than its exterior could possibly contain. Shelves stretched up into shadowed heights, crammed with an eclectic and bewildering array of objects. A grandfather clock with a face of polished obsidian ticked backward, its single hand sweeping counterclockwise with silent grace. On a nearby pedestal, a glass sphere contained a perfect, miniature desert, complete with shifting dunes and a tiny, blazing sun. Rikka watched, mesmerized, as a microscopic sandstorm brewed and dissipated within the confines of the glass. There were astrolabes with too many rings, compasses whose needles spun wildly, pointing at every direction at once, and a collection of hourglasses filled not with sand, but with luminous, swirling motes of light, each one falling at a different, inconsistent speed. This was not a shop, it was a museum of impossible artifacts. An unexpected visitor, or perhaps, not so unexpected after all. The voice was calm, a low, smooth baritone that didn't startle her as much as it simply arrived in her awareness. It seemed to emanate from the very shadows of the shop. Rikka turned towards the sound and saw him standing behind a massive counter carved from a single, petrified tree trunk. He hadn't been there a second ago. She was sure of it. He looked to be in his late 20s, with sun-kissed blonde hair that seemed to defy the gloom of the shop and a face that was handsome in a way that was almost aggressively symmetrical. He wore simple, modern clothes, a black turtleneck and dark gray trousers, that somehow looked as timeless as the objects surrounding him. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were a shocking, piercing blue, the color of a deep ocean trench, and they held an expression of such ancient, wry amusement that it felt like looking at a geological formation. He wasn't looking at her so much as he was looking into her, with a placid, unnerving omniscience that made her feel utterly transparent. "Welcome to the hourglass, Takarada Rikka," he said, his lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. Rikka's heart hammered against her ribs. He knew her name. Of course, he knew her name. In a place like this, the normal rules felt flimsy and irrelevant. How do you know who I am?" she managed, her voice a small, wavering thing in the vast silence. Some things have a way of announcing themselves, he replied. His voice a gentle rumble. He gestured to the shop around them. Every object in this place tells a story. A history. You are much the same. Your presence has a certain resonance. He tilted his head, his blue eyes seeming to catalog every doubt and fear flitting through her mind. You are feeling lost, adrift, like a ship that has mistaken a reflection of the moon on the water for the real thing. His words hit her with the force of a physical blow, a perfect, poetic articulation of the formless dread that had haunted her for months. She felt a flush of embarrassment, of being seen so clearly. So effortlessly. Who are you? She asked, taking a half step back towards the door. I am merely the proprietor, he said, his smile never wavering. A keeper of things that are, things that were, and things that might have been. You may call me Naruto. The name was surprisingly normal, a stark contrast to the sheer abnormality of everything else. Naruto. He watched her, his expression patient, as if he had all the time in the world to wait for her to process the impossibility of her situation. Rikka's mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A prank, a hidden camera show, some kind of elaborate escape room. But no trick could explain the silence, the impossible objects, the sheer, palpable wrongness of this place that felt more real than the world outside. Her gaze drifted past him, towards the large window. The rain was still streaming down the glass, distorting the view of the alley. And then, beyond the alley, across the main street, she saw it. Café Septième. Its warm, inviting lights were a beacon of normalcy in her sea of confusion. She could see the silhouette of the owner, Mr. Hanamura, cleaning the espresso machine. The familiar, cursive neon sign glowed a comforting green. I have to go, she stammered, pointing a trembling finger towards the window. My friends and I, were supposed to go there tomorrow. The words sounded childish, foolish, even to her own ears. A desperate grasp for the mundane. Naruto's gaze followed hers. He looked at the cafe, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something unreadable passed through his ancient eyes. It wasn't sadness, or pity, it was something closer to clinical observation, the look of a watchmaker examining a timepiece that was about to fail. Ah, yes, the Café Septième, he said, his voice soft. A pleasant little establishment, good coffee. The cat is particularly charming. His knowledge of the cat, Latte, sent another shiver down her spine. You've been there. I have observed it, he corrected gently. There is a difference. He turned his gaze back to her, his blue eyes seeming to pin her in place. Hold on to that memory, Takarada Rikka. Hold on to it tightly. Notice the details. The color of the sign. The crack in the third windowpane from the left. The way the light spills onto the wet pavement. His words were strange, hypnotic. Rikka found herself obeying, cataloging the details of the cafe in her mind. The green sign, the familiar crack, the warm, buttery light. It was real. It was her anchor. And then it happened. It wasn't a sudden, explosive event. It was a subtle, sickening lurch in the fabric of reality. For a split second, the air in the alley outside the window seemed to shimmer, to warp like intense heat haze, but the sensation that washed over her was one of profound, unnatural cold. It was a visual and sensory contradiction, a glitch in the world's programming. The lights of the cafe flickered, not like a faulty bulb, but like a candle flame in a sudden vacuum. They stretched, thinned, and then, snuffed out. When Rikka's vision cleared a heartbeat later, the Café Septième was gone. It was not destroyed. It had not been replaced by rubble or an empty lot. In its place stood a building that was unequivocally, indisputably old. It was a two-story structure of stained, weather-beaten concrete, with windows that were boarded up and grimy with decades of accumulated filth. A faded, peeling sign above the door hinted that it might have once been a real estate office, but the kanji were so worn as to be almost illegible. Rue Saint stains bled down the walls from a decrepit air conditioning unit. It was a derelict, abandoned place that looked like it had been a part of the city's forgotten landscape for half a century. Rikka stared, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. No, she whispered. No, that's not possible. She pressed her face against the cool glass of the shop window, her breath fogging the pain. It was just there. I saw it. The cafe. Where is it? Naruto was silent. He simply watched her, his expression unchanged, his posture relaxed. He was the calm eye of her personal hurricane. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up her throat. This had to be a trick. A projection. Some kind of hyper-realistic illusion. She fumbled with the door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely find the serpent emblem. She pushed, and the door swung open, releasing her back into the rainy, noisy world of the alley. The change was jarring. The sounds of the city crashed down on her again, but they sounded wrong. Their tones subtly altered, like a familiar song played in a different key. She stumbled out of the alley and onto the main street, her umbrella forgotten in the shop. The rain plastered her hair to her face. Cold and shocking, she stared at the spot where her favorite cafe had stood just moments before. The derelict building remained, solid and undeniable. It was real. It was there. No, no, no. The mantra tumbled from her lips. She pulled out her phone, her fingers slipping on the wet screen as she frantically dialed Namiko. The phone rang 3 times before her friend picked up. Rikka, what's up? Forget to tell me something about Utsumi's legendary awkwardness. Namiko's voice was a lifeline to the world that made sense. The cafe, Rikka practically shouted, her voice cracking with hysteria. Namiko, Cafe Septième, it's gone. There was a pause on the other end. Cafe what? Rikka, what are you talking about? Are you okay? You sound weird. Septième, our cafe, the one we were going to tomorrow. Rikka's voice was rising in pitch. A man walking past with a briefcase gave her a wide berth, a look of concern and pity on his face. Rikka, slow down, Namiko said, her tone shifting from playful to worried. I have no idea what you're talking about. Is that, like, a new place? Did it just open? New. We've been going there since our first year of high school. Mr. Hanamura, Latte the cat, the melon pan special you were just talking about. She was practically screaming now, desperation making her reckless. Whoa, okay, I think you're seriously freaking me out, Namiko said. Her voice laced with genuine alarm. I have never heard of that place in my life. And I definitely didn't mention any melon pan. We were talking about the crepe place over by the station, remember? Rikka's blood ran cold. The crepe place. No, that wasn't right. She remembered the conversation clearly. It was about the cafe. It had been, hadn't it? A seed of doubt, terrifying and insidious, began to sprout in her mind. She ended the call without another word, her hand falling limply to her side. Her reality was fraying at the edges. The world she knew was being rewritten. And she was the only one who could see the edits. She approached a young couple huddled under a single umbrella. Excuse me, she said, her voice hoarse. The cafe that used to be here, do you remember it? The man looked at the derelict building and then back at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. Here, no, that old dump has been there as long as I can remember. My dad said it used to be an office. But it's been empty for at least 20 years. His girlfriend nodded in agreement, pulling him away from the strange, rain-soaked girl. Rikka stumbled back, the pavement seeming to tilt beneath her feet. 20 years. The world's memory, its history, had been seamlessly, flawlessly altered. Mr. Hanamura, a kind man who always gave them extra cookies. Latte, the sleepy cat. The dozens of customers who had been inside just moments ago. Had they ever existed? If a memory existed only in one person's mind, was it still real? The hollowness she had felt earlier was nothing compared to this. This was an abyss. She was an island of memory in an ocean of forgetting, and the tide was rising. There was only one place to go. One person who wasn't looking at her like she was crazy. She turned and fled back to the alley. Back to the impossible shop that was her only anchor in a world that was coming undone. She burst through the door of the hourglass, breathless and trembling, dripping rainwater onto the pristine wooden floor. Naruto was exactly where she had left him, leaning against the counter, an expression of profound patience on his face. He held her forgotten umbrella in one hand. They don't remember, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. It's all gone. It's like it never existed. It didn't, Naruto said, his voice calm and steady, a lighthouse in her storm. Not anymore. The narrative has been edited. A paragraph deleted. For everyone else, the story still makes sense. There is no contradiction. The old real estate office has always been there. But I remember, she insisted. Her voice pleading. Why do I remember? Because you, Takarada Rikka, are an anomaly, he explained, pushing himself off the counter and walking towards her. He moved with a silent, fluid grace that was almost unnerving. Most minds are pliable, they float on the current of consensual reality. When the current changes, they change with it, seamlessly and without question. Your consciousness, however, has a stronger anchor. You are tethered more tightly to the way things were. You feel the change. You see the seams where the world has been stitched back together. He stopped a few feet from her. The air around him felt different, charged with a static energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. What you just witnessed was an erasure. A small one, a hiccup and the narrative caused by a parasitic force. A parasitic force. Imagine reality as a story being told, he said, his blue eyes intense. This force is like a smudge of ink that slowly spreads, obscuring the words, deleting them. Until all that remains is a blank, meaningless page. It is a form of sentient entropy. A silent, creeping null. As he spoke, Rikka became aware of a lingering sensation from outside. A spot in the air, right where the cafe's entrance had been, felt cold. It was a localized drop in temperature that had no natural source, a lingering wrongness. Naruto seemed to notice her distraction. He glanced towards the window, and his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. The aftershock, the static left behind by the erasure, he murmured. He raised one hand, his fingers held loosely. He made no grand incantation, no mystical gesture. He simply waved his hand, a casual, dismissive motion, as if brushing away a fly. Through the window, Rikka saw it. The air in the alley shimmered for a second. Not with cold, but with a brief, golden warmth. The unnatural chill that had clung to the street vanished, and the world outside suddenly felt solid again. The colors seemed richer, the sounds sharper. The terrifying sense of wrongness was gone, replaced by the mundane reality of a rainy Tokyo night. A mundane reality that no longer included the Café Septième. Rikka stared at him, her fear momentarily eclipsed by sheer, unadulterated awe. What did you do? I tidied up, he said simply. I smoothed over the wrinkle. A temporary fix, but the fabric is growing weaker. The erasures will become more frequent, larger in scale. A cafe today, a city block tomorrow, a city, a country, a memory. The concept of love, the law of gravity, it consumes indiscriminately. He looked at her then, and for the first time, she felt the full, crushing weight of his age, his perspective. He wasn't a man. He was something else entirely, wearing a man's shape like a coat. He was a being who spoke of the end of reality with the same calm detachment one might use to discuss the weather. I cannot act directly, he continued, his voice dropping slightly. My nature is too fundamental. If I were to exert my true will upon your world to fight this null, the sheer pressure of my existence would shatter this fragile reality into dust. It would be like trying to perform surgery with a supernova. I require an agent. A champion, someone who is anchored to this world, yet possesses the potential to impose their will upon it. Someone like you. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture so vast and terrifying that Rikka felt her knees might buckle. The hollowness she always felt. The sense of detachment. It wasn't a flaw, it was a symptom. It was the reason she could remember. It was the quality that this being needed. He offered her a choice. His voice was devoid of pressure, of coercion. It was the voice of a cosmic constant stating the options. You have two paths, Takarada Rikka. You can walk out that door and return to your life. You can try to forget what you have seen. You can pretend the world is not slowly unraveling. You will live a normal life, for a time. Until the erasures become too large to ignore, until the blank pages overwhelm the story. Or, he paused, his blue eyes locking onto hers, you can stay. You can learn to fight this encroaching emptiness. You can learn to become a bulwark against the void. I will teach you. I will give you the tools. But the will, the fight, that must be your own. He held her gaze, and in that moment, Rikka saw her entire life laid out before her. The comfortable, predictable path of school, friends, and a future that felt like a distant, hazy shoreline. It was safe. It was known. And it was hollow. The other path was a sheer cliff face disappearing into a storm. It promised terror, confusion, and a battle against a foe she couldn't even comprehend. But it also promised purpose. It promised an answer to the unspoken question that had been humming beneath the surface of her life. It was a chance to fill the emptiness not with distractions, but with meaning. The fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a tiny, defiant spark ignited. The memory of Mr. Hanamura's kind smile, of Latte the cat purring under her hand, of laughter shared with her friends over coffee and pastries in a place that no longer existed. It burned in her mind, a solitary candle in an encroaching darkness. She would not let that light go out. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the cool, ancient air of the shop filling her lungs. She looked at the ancient being in the shape of a man named Naruto, and she gave him her answer. "Okay," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll do it. Teach me how to fight." A slow, genuine smile spread across Naruto's face, and for the first time, the ancient weariness in his eyes was replaced by something else. A flicker of hope. "A wise choice," he said. He turned and walked towards a simple, unadorned wooden door at the back of the shop, a door she hadn't noticed before. "The first lesson begins now. The world you know is a fragile, beautiful thing. It is time you learned what it is truly made of." He opened the door. Rikka expected to see a stockroom, or perhaps another alley. Instead, she was met with an impossible vista that shattered every known law of physics and geometry. She was looking into a vast, silent library that stretched into an infinite twilight. The shelves were impossibly tall, and every book on every shelf glowed with a soft, internal light. There was no ceiling, only a sky filled with still, silent constellations she did not recognize. The air that drifted out was cool and smelled of eternity. Naruto stood on the threshold, one hand holding the door open, and beckoned her forward. "Welcome, Rikka Takarada," he said, his voice echoing in the impossible space. "Welcome to the archive. This is the forge where you will learn to defend reality. Your training begins now." Rikka hesitated for only a heartbeat, then squared her shoulders and walked through the door, leaving the rainy streets of Tokyo, and the last vestiges of her normal life, behind. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Forge of Will. The transition was not a step, but a cessation. One moment, Rikka's senses were filled with the tangible reality of the antique shop, the smell of ozone and old wood, the cool dampness of her clothes, the faint, lingering sound of rain on a distant window. The next, there was nothing. And then, everything. The silence was the first thing she noticed. For it was not an absence of sound but a presence. It was a thick, velvet curtain that muffled the universe, pressing in on her eardrums with a gentle, insistent weight. It was the absolute, perfect quiet of a cosmos holding its breath. She stood on a floor of smooth, gray stone that seemed to absorb all reflection, stretching out in every direction into an impossible expanse. Above her, where a ceiling should have been, was a star-dusted twilight. The constellations were alien, intricate webs of silver and pale gold light against a canvas of the deepest indigo imaginable. They did not twinkle. They were serene and motionless, painted onto the firmament. And all around her, rising up into that silent, star-strewn gloom, were the shelves. They were not arranged in neat, orderly rows like a human library. They were a forest of dark wood, a geometric wonderland that defied perspective. Some shelves shot straight up, disappearing into the heights. Others curved in gentle, impossible arcs, or spiraled like the shell of a nautilus. They formed canyons and valleys, plateaus and sheer cliffs of knowledge. And on every shelf, in every conceivable space, were the books. Millions of them, billions. They were not dusty or old, but pristine, each one glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. Some pulsed with a gentle, white light, others shimmered with the cool blue of glacial ice or the warm amber of trapped sunlight. The collective glow of them was the only source of light in the vast chamber, a soft, diffuse radiance that cast no shadows. "This is the archive." Naruto's voice was different here. In the shop, it had been calm. Here, it was part of the silence, a subtle vibration in the very air around her. He stood beside her, his presence a small point of warmth in the cool, eternal twilight. It is a nexus, a place where things are recorded. Rikka could only stare, overwhelmed. The sheer scale of it was beyond human comprehension. It felt like standing on the floor of an ocean of thought. Recorded. Like. History books. The question felt small, inadequate. Of a sort, Naruto said, beginning to walk down a wide aisle that seemed to carve itself into existence before them. Rikka followed, her footsteps making no sound on the gray stone. A history book tells you that a king lived and died. It might tell you what he did. It will not tell you the weight of the crown on his head, the taste of the wine at his coronation, or the precise shade of regret in his eyes on the day he signed a declaration of war. A history book is a summary. These, he gestured to the glowing tomes, are the moments themselves. Preserved, intact. He stopped before a tall, slender shelf filled with books that glowed a soft, sea green. He reached out and let his fingers trail along their spines, which were not made of paper or leather, but something that looked like polished, solidified water. Every book contains a single, crystallized instant. An event, a decision, a sensation, the birth of a star, the composition of a forgotten symphony, the last thought of a dying soldier. All of it is here. This is the raw data of existence. Rikka reached out a hesitant hand, stopping just short of touching one of the green glowing spines. So, you're a librarian. The word was a ridiculous understatement, but it was the only one her brain could supply. A faint, amused smile touched Naruto's lips. You could say that. I am the curator of the story. I ensure the pages are not torn out. He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious, reflecting the myriad lights of the shelves. And now, you must learn to do the same. You must become a guardian of the narrative. But I don't understand, Rikka said, a tremor of her earlier fear returning. What am I supposed to do? What even is my power? You said I was an anchor. What does that mean? It means that while others are swept away by the current, you hold fast, he explained. Your perception of reality is stubborn, resilient. Where another person's memory of the Café Septième was rewritten without their knowledge, yours resisted. It created a contradiction, a paradox. It is this very quality we must forge into a weapon. He led her away from the shelves, towards an open space in the center of the vast chamber. In the middle of the stone floor, a low, circular pedestal rose seamlessly. It was as gray and featureless as the rest of the floor. Your training will not be physical, Naruto stated. There will be no sparring, no tests of strength. The silent null is not a beast to be slain with a sword or a spell. It is a negation, an absence. How do you fight a shadow? How do you punch a hole? You cannot attack it directly. Then what do I do? Rikka asked, her frustration mounting. You do not fight the emptiness. He said, his voice patient. You fill it. You do not attack the shadow, you overwhelm it with light. Your will, your ability to hold a concept in your mind with perfect, unshakable clarity. Is that light? That is your power, the imposition of substance upon the void. He gestured to the pedestal. Let us begin with a simple exercise. Close your eyes. I want you to picture an apple. Rikka blinked. An apple. That's it. An apple, he confirmed, his tone leaving no room for argument. She sighed and did as she was told. She closed her eyes and pictured an apple. A red one. Simple enough. Your attempt is crude, Naruto's voice commented, sounding disappointed. It is a two-dimensional image. A cartoon. It has no substance. I want you to create the apple. Give it reality within your mind. Quote. He began to guide her, his voice a calm, relentless scalpel dissecting her imagination. What kind of apple is it? A Fuji, a Gala, a Granny Smith. Where did it come from? An orchard in Aomori, a supermarket shelf. Feel its weight in your palm. Is it heavy, dense with juice? Or is it light, slightly mealy? What is the texture of the skin? Is it perfectly smooth and waxy? Or does it have tiny imperfections? A small, brown spot near the stem. A slight dimple where it rested against a branch. Can you feel the cool, taut surface under your fingertips? Rikka struggled, forcing her mind to focus. It was harder than it sounded. The image kept slipping, simplifying itself. But she pushed, following his prompts. She pictured a Fuji apple, one like her mom bought last week. She felt its weight. She pictured the faint, vertical stripes in its red and yellow skin. She visualized the way the light from an imaginary window would reflect off its surface. Better, Naruto acknowledged. Now, engage your other senses. Bring the apple to your nose. What does it smell like? Not just Apple. Does it smell sweet? A little tart? Is there a faint, earthy scent of the tree, of the soil it grew in? Now, imagine the sound. The sharp, satisfying crack as you bite into it. The rush of juice. What does it taste like? The initial burst of sweetness, followed by a subtle, crisp tartness. The texture of the flesh, both firm and yielding. Hold all of these sensations in your mind at once. The sight, the smell, the sound, the taste, the touch. Do not let a single detail slip. Make it real. Rikka's brow was furrowed in concentration. Her breathing deepened. She poured all of her focus into this single, imaginary apple. She could feel it, taste it, smell it. For a few brief seconds. The apple in her mind was more real to her than the cool, silent air of the archive she was breathing. Good, Naruto's voice said, sounding closer. Now, hold it, don't let go. And then she felt it. It was a cold, invasive probe at the edge of her consciousness. It was not a physical sensation, but a mental one, a psychic sliver of ice. It touched her perfect, imagined apple, and the details began to fray. It's just red, a part of her mind thought, a thought that wasn't hers. It's not that specific shade. It doesn't have stripes. The image flickered. The carefully constructed stripes on the apple's skin vanished. It doesn't have a scent, the invasive thought continued, flat and toneless. It's just an idea. It's scentless. The sweet, fruity aroma in her memory faded to nothing. No, Rikka whispered. Her eyes squeezed shut. She fought to remember the smell, to repaint the stripes onto the apple's skin with her will. The sound is fake. There was no crack. It's silent. It's tasteless. It's weightless. It's not an apple. It's a red circle. It's a color. It's a word. It's nothing. The attack was relentless. It wasn't forceful. It was insidious. It didn't destroy her creation. It simply simplified it. It drained the reality from it, one detail at a time, replacing substance with vague notions, then replacing those notions with emptiness. The apple thinned, becoming a ghost, a sketch. And then it dissolved into a formless, red smudge, and then even the color faded, and there was nothing left but a blank space in her mind where it had been. Rikka gasped and her eyes flew open. She was breathing heavily, a cold sweat on her brow. She felt violated, as if a thief had just broken into the most private part of her and stolen something precious. Naruto stood before her, his expression neutral. In his outstretched palm, a small, inky black wisp, no larger than her thumb, writhed and dissipated like smoke. That, he said, was an infinitesimally small fragment of the null. A single drop from an endless ocean. It does not destroy, it unmakes. It erases the details that comprise reality, the complexity that defines existence. It reduces everything to its simplest, most meaningless state, and then reduces that state to nothing. Rikka shuddered, rubbing her temples. I couldn't hold it. No, you could not, he stated, without judgment. Your focus is untrained. Your will is a dull edge. The apple was a simple concept. Your memory of the cafe was more complex, a tapestry of sensations and emotions built over years. That is why your mind was able to anchor it, if only for a short time. Your emotional connection to a memory gives it substance. It gives it weight, but sentiment alone is not enough. It must be reinforced with discipline, with unwavering focus. He began to walk again, leading her deeper into the labyrinth of shelves. The null is growing stronger. The erasures are becoming more aggressive. The small fragment I used on you was contained, controlled. Out there, in your world, it is a cancer, spreading through the narrative. To fight it, you must be able to hold a concept more vast and more complex than a piece of fruit. You must be able to anchor a memory that is not your own. You must be able to defend a piece of the story that is fundamental. They arrived in a different section of the archive. Here, the books on the shelves glowed with a pale, pinkish-white light, like the dawn on a cool spring morning. The air felt lighter, carrying a faint, sweet fragrance that Rikka couldn't quite place. Naruto stopped before a single, isolated pedestal on which rested a solitary book. It was bound not in wood or leather, but in a material that looked like petrified cherry wood, its surface smooth and pale. He title was etched into the cover in elegant, flowing kanji, Chuying Hatsuzakura, the first cherry blossom. This book contains the memory of the first time a human being looked upon a cherry blossom in bloom and felt hope, Naruto said. His voice soft, almost reverent. It is not a historically significant event in terms of battles or dynasties. There were no kings present. No famous poets. It was just a nameless man, a hunter, returning to his village after a long, brutal winter that had claimed many lives. He was tired, hungry, and hopeless. And then he saw it. A single tree, covered in pale, delicate flowers. A defiant splash of life against the gray, desolate landscape. And he felt the promise of spring, of renewal. The belief that things could get better. That single, private moment of profound, unarticulated hope was a seed. It grew into a cultural touchstone, a symbol that would define a nation's aesthetic and philosophy for millennia. He looked at her, and the full weight of his purpose seemed to press down on her. It is a foundational memory, a cornerstone of the story, and it is for this reason that the null is drawn to it. It seeks to erase such things first. He gestured to a crystalline box that hovered in the air beside the pedestal. Inside it, a churning, chaotic sphere of absolute blackness writhed. It was far larger than the wisp he had summoned before, perhaps the size of her fist. It was a hole in the universe, a patch of anti-reality that seemed to drink the soft light of the glowing books around it. This is a more substantial fragment of the null, captured from the erasure of the cafe. I am going to release it. It will attempt to consume the memory within that book. Rikka's blood ran cold. And what am I supposed to do? You are going to be the guardian, Naruto said. You will enter the memory. You will live it, and you will use your will to keep it intact. You will be the anchor that holds the page in place while the void tries to tear it out. But I just failed with an apple. How can I do this? Panic seized her. The responsibility was too immense. You will do it because you must, Naruto replied, his voice unyielding. You will do it because the alternative is to allow another piece of the world, another beautiful, important part of the story, to be rendered blank. Do not think of it as a fight. Think of it as an act of remembrance. You must remember this moment. This feeling of hope, with more conviction than the null can muster to forget it. Your only weapon is belief. He placed a hand on the cover of the book. Are you ready? She was not ready. Not even close. She was a high school girl who, just an hour ago, had been worrying about a melon pan special. But looking at the roiling sphere of blackness, and then at the pale, beautiful book. She knew he was right. There was no alternative. She swallowed hard, the sound loud in the oppressive silence, and nodded. I'm ready. Naruto opened the book. There was no text on the pages. Instead, a wave of sensation washed over Rikka. It was not a light or a sound, but a complete sensory immersion. The cool, still air of the archive was replaced by a sharp, biting wind that smelled of melting snow and damp earth. The ground beneath her feet was no longer smooth stone, but soft, muddy ground littered with decaying leaves. The twilight sky of the library was gone, replaced by a low, oppressive ceiling of gray clouds. She was in a sparse, leafless forest, standing on a hill overlooking a small, primitive village of thatched huts. It was a world of browns and grays, a landscape drained of all color and life. She felt a weariness in her bones that was not her own, a deep, gnawing hunger in her belly. She was not Rikka Takarada anymore. She was the hunter. She felt his despair, the grief for the family members lost to the harsh winter, the fear that the spring would never come. It was a suffocating blanket of misery. And then she saw it. Just as Naruto had described. On the crest of the hill, a single, skeletal tree had exploded into a riot of pale pink flowers. It was the only point of color in the entire world, a breathtaking, impossible promise. The hunter's breath caught in his chest. A feeling, fragile and yet intensely powerful, began to bloom in his heart, mirroring the blossoms on the tree. It was hope, raw, pure, and overwhelming. It was the most beautiful thing Rikka had ever experienced. Then, the world flickered. A cold wind, colder than the winter air, swept across the hill. It carried no scent. On the far side of the clearing, the darkness from the crystal box began to bleed into the memory. It was not a creature or shape, but a creeping stain of nothingness that advanced across the landscape. The gray sky above it seemed to thin, becoming washed out. The trees at the edge of the void lost their texture, becoming flat, black silhouettes. The sound of the wind began to fade, replaced by a low, draining hum. It's just a tree, a voice whispered in her mind. The same flat, toneless voice from the apple exercise, but stronger now, more insistent. The flowers are pale, anemic. They will be gone tomorrow. They mean nothing. Rikka, standing in the hunter's place, gritted her teeth. No, she whispered into the wind. They're not just pale. They're the color of the dawn. They're a promise. She focused on the color, on the delicate, paper-thin texture of the petals, forcing the details to remain sharp in the face of the encroaching numbness. The null advanced. The ground it touched became featureless and gray. The despair in the hunter's heart, which had begun to recede, surged back, amplified by the null's influence. The hope is an illusion, the voice asserted. The winter will return. The hunger will remain. This tree is a lie. It offers nothing. The feeling of hope in Rikka's chest began to wither. The null was not just attacking the sensory details of the memory, it was attacking its emotional core, its very meaning. She felt the hunter's spirit breaking, the beautiful, fragile feeling dissolving under a wave of absolute nihilism. She was losing. The blossoms on the tree began to look transparent, their color leaching away. No, she screamed, her own voice tearing through the hunter's consciousness. This was not his fight anymore, it was hers. She had to believe, she had to remember the hope for him. She closed her eyes, not in the memory, but her real eyes, somewhere back in the archive. She pushed away the hunter's despair and focused on her own life. She remembered the genuine, uncomplicated joy of laughing with Namiko and Has. She remembered the warmth of the sun on her skin during the summer festival. She remembered the quiet satisfaction of solving a difficult math problem. She dredged up every scrap of happiness, every moment of contentment, every flicker of hope she had ever experienced in her 17 years of life. They were small things, mundane things, but they were real. They were hers. She took that reservoir of emotion and poured it into the hunter's moment. She used it to fuel his fragile, newfound hope, to give it substance and strength. It matters, she projected, her own thoughts now a weapon against the null's insidious whispers. It doesn't matter if the flowers are temporary. The feeling is real. The promise is real. The blossoms on the tree flared with renewed color, a brilliant, defiant pink. The creeping void slowed its advance. The psychic pressure lessened slightly. She was pushing it back. A surge of triumph shot through her. It was a fatal mistake. The moment her focus shifted to her victory, the null lashed out with renewed venom. It bypassed the scenery and attacked her directly, her connection to the memory. "And who are you?" the voice hissed, no longer just a whisper but a cacophony of doubt. "You are no one, a lost girl in a borrowed memory. Your feelings are insignificant. Your joy is a chemical reaction in a primitive brain. Your furry, ND ships are a temporary alliance against existential solitude. You are a hollow thing, pretending to be full." It used her own deepest insecurity against her, the very hollowness that had led her to Naruto's shop. It struck her core, and her defenses crumbled. The images of her friends, of the sun, of her small, happy moments, they all turned to ash in her mind, rendered meaningless by the sheer, crushing weight of the void's nihilism. The hope in the memory shattered. The cherry blossoms turned to gray dust and blew away on a dead wind. The tree became a black, skeletal claw against a blank, white sky. The world was dissolving. She was failing. She was adrift in a gray, meaningless fog, the hunter's despair and her own combining into a single, overwhelming wave of utter hopelessness. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, final fizzle into nothing. From somewhere far away, outside the dying memory, she heard Naruto's voice. It was not instructional, not calm. It was sharp, a command that cut through the fog. "Remember the cafe, Rikka. The cafe. The cafe septième. The memory that had been stolen from the world, but not from her. The green neon sign. The crack in the window. Mr. Hanamura's smile. The smell of coffee. The warmth. The comfort. It was a memory that had been proven to be stronger than a small piece of this void. It was her anchor. She clung to it. She rebuilt the cafe in her mind, brick by brick, sensation by sensation, not as a casual memory but as a fortress. The null assaulted it, but this memory was different. It was forged in loss, tempered by the injustice of its own erasure. It had a defiant core. It wasn't real, the null whispered. It was real. Rikka screamed back in the silence of her own mind. "I remember it. She used the indignation, the anger, the fierce, possessive grief she felt for her lost place, her stolen memory, and she turned it into a shield. She stood inside the memory of her cafe and used it to weather the storm of the null's assault. The nihilism washed over her, but it couldn't get a purchase. She was no longer just Rikka. She was the sole keeper of a lost truth, and that gave her an unexpected, unshakable strength. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to push back. She was not just defending anymore. She was attacking. She extended the feeling of warmth from the cafe, the sense of belonging, into the gray fog of the ruined cherry blossom memory. She projected the hunter's hope not as a fragile, passive feeling, but as an aggressive, defiant act. Hope is not a feeling, she thought, the evolution striking her with the force of a thunderclap. It is a choice. It is a rebellion against despair. She pushed the warmth, the color, the meaning back into the memory. The gray fog receded. The muddy ground reformed. The oppressive gray sky softened. The skeletal tree began to regain its shape and texture. She was not just remembering the moment now, she was rebuilding it from the ground up. Using her own will as the raw material. The null fought back, but it was losing ground. It was an entity of erasure, of subtraction. It had no answer to an act of pure, unadulterated creation. With a final, desperate effort, Rikka focused all of her will, all of her belief, all of her defiant memory of the cafe, into the single, central concept of the cherry blossom. She poured everything she was into that image. The tree exploded into bloom. It was not the pale, delicate pink she had first witnessed. The blossoms that burst forth were a vibrant, luminous pink, so bright they seemed to generate their own light. They blazed with an intensity that drove back the last vestiges of the gray fog, that burned away the creeping tendrils of the null. The feeling of hope that filled the memory was no longer fragile and tentative. It was a triumphant, deafening roar. It was the absolute, undeniable, conceptual reality of spring. The psychic pressure vanished. The insidious voice was silenced. A profound sense of peace settled over the memory. She had done it. The world dissolved around her, not into nothingness, but into a gentle, swirling light. She felt a disorienting lurch, and then the cool, solid stone of the archive was beneath her again. She collapsed, her legs giving out completely. Every muscle in her body ached, and her head throbbed with a colossal migraine. She felt as though she had just run 1,000 marathons while simultaneously taking the most difficult exam of her life. The exhaustion was absolute, a crushing weight that seemed to suck her down into the stone floor. Naruto was kneeling beside her. He placed a cool hand on her forehead. "Breathe," he said softly. "You have done well, exceptionally well." Rikka's vision was blurry. The glowing books on the shelves seemed to swim in and out of focus. She looked at the pedestal. The book, Hatsuzakura, was closed, its pale pink light shining more brightly than before. The crystal box that had held the null was empty. Is it gone?" she rasped, her throat raw. "You did not destroy it," Naruto corrected. "It cannot be destroyed. You simply defeated it. You filled the space it wished to occupy with so much substance, so much reality, that there was no room for it. It has been repelled." He helped her sit up. The world slowly stopped spinning. She felt drained, hollowed out, but it was a different kind of hollowness than before. It was the satisfying emptiness of a challenge met, of a great labor completed. "I almost failed," she whispered. "Almost is not the same as failure," he said. "You were tested to your absolute limit. You bent, but you did not break. And you discovered the true nature of your power. It is not just an anchor. It is a forge. You can create. You can reinforce. You can make a memory, a concept, more real than it was before." He opened his hand. Resting in his palm was a single, perfect cherry blossom petal. It was not a physical petal of flesh and water. It was made of solidified pink light, glowing with the same vibrant, triumphant luminescence as the blossoms she had created in the memory. It pulsed with a gentle warmth. "What is that?" she asked, mesmerized. "A reward, a trophy," he said, placing it in her hand. It was light as a feather but felt substantial, real in a way nothing else was. When you reinforce a concept to such a degree, a part of it crystallizes. It becomes a tangible echo of the story you protected. It is proof of your victory. Rikka closed her fingers around the glowing petal. The warmth spread up her arm, chasing away some of the bone-deep exhaustion. She looked at it, this impossible, beautiful thing she had created. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt a sense of concrete purpose. A sense of her own power. The hollowness inside her wasn't gone, but now, it felt less like an empty space and more like a vessel, waiting to be filled. The training had been the most grueling, terrifying experience of her life. And she couldn't wait to continue. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Ghost in the Code. The air in the pinnacle, the apex of the Argus Corporation's Tokyo Spire, was less an atmosphere and more a meticulously engineered life support system. It was chilled to a precise 18.3 degrees Celsius, filtered to a sub-micron level, and carried the faint, sterile scent of ionized helium from the quantum computing core 2 floors below. For Akane Shinjo, it was the only air she truly felt comfortable breathing. The world outside was a chaotic, unpredictable mess of organic variables. Here, in her glass-walled sanctuary suspended 1,000 feet above the sprawling city, everything was data. Everything was control. Akane's focus was a tripartite entity, her consciousness split with practiced ease across 3 distinct information streams. Her left eye tracked the cascading, blood-red river of the global stock market on a wraparound holographic display, her mind processing the terabytes of transaction data not as numbers, but as a complex, evolving weather pattern. Her right eye monitored a swirling, 3-dimensional model of a protein she was designing, its fractal architecture folding in U-N-folding according to the parameters she dictated with subliminal subvocal commands to her personal AI, Daedalus. The third, and most significant, portion of her attention was directed inward, reviewing the security protocols of ARGUS's proprietary intranet, a fortress of black ice code she herself had built, searching for theoretical vulnerabilities with the predatory focus of a shark circling its own reflection. Daedalus cross-referenced dark pool liquidity fluctuations with the latest solar flare projections. I'm seeing a correlation anomaly in the petabyte-scale algorithmic trading data, she murmured. Her fingers never ceasing their phantom dance across a keyboard that existed only as a projection of light on the black glass of her desk. Her voice was a low, rapid-fire monotone, each word clipped and precise. Devoid of wasted inflection. Less than correlation is statistically insignificant. Architect Shinjo, below the 0.001% threshold. Likely sensor noise from the orbital array, greater than the AI's voice responded, a calm, synthesized baritone that resonated directly within her custom-fitted cochlear implant. Noise doesn't have a repeating hexadecimal signature, Daedalus, she countered without looking up. Isolate the signature. Run a deep system diagnostic. Someone might be attempting a novel form of quantum tunneling. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, modeling the physics of such an attack. A flicker of professional interest warring with her annoyance at the intrusion. It was then that the first snowflake fell. It was a large, impossibly perfect dendrite, and it did not fall past her window but seemed to materialize directly on the reinforced plexiglass before vanishing. Then another appeared, and another. Within a minute, a swirling vortex of white had engulfed the top of the tower. Akane paused her work for the first time in 4 hours, a cardinal sin in her rigidly structured day. She turned her chair, a sleek cocoon of polished chrome and white leather, to face the window. A full-scale blizzard was raging outside, a furious, silent tempest that had appeared from a perfectly clear summer sky. The city below was rapidly disappearing under a blanket of white. Daedalus, meteorological report. Now, less than there is a discrepancy, architect, greater than the AI's voice held a note of what could almost be described as synthetic confusion. Less than all external sensors, government reports, and satellite imagery show clear skies and a temperature of 28 degrees Celsius. However, the tower's localized atmospheric sensors register a temperature of -12 degrees and barometric pressure consistent with a severe winter storm. The phenomenon appears to be limited to a radius of approximately 500 meters around this building. Greater than. Akane's eyes narrowed. An impossible weather event, localized to her exact position. It was not weather. It was a statement. An attack. Lock down the tower. Full security protocol. No one in or out. Isolate our network from the global grid. Run all external communications through a shielded quantum buffer. Less than acknowledged. Greater than. As the commands were executed, the red river of the stock market on her main display began to stutter. It wasn't crashing. It was glitching. Tickers for some of the world's largest corporations, companies as solid and real as the steel frame of the tower around her, flickered and were replaced by a single, stark word: null. What is that? Akane demanded, rising from her chair and striding towards the display. A DDoS attack. A virus. Less than negative, architect. The data streams are intact. The connections are secure. But the information itself, it is losing coherence. The packets are arriving, but their symbolic representation is degrading. It is as if the system is forgetting what the numbers signify. Greater than forgetting. The word sent a jolt of pure, intellectual horror through Akane. Systems did not forget. They could be corrupted, wiped, or destroyed. But the concept of a system forgetting its own function was a logical and physical impossibility. It was like a book's words remaining on the page, but the very concept of language itself being erased. Her screens began to fail in a cascade of silent error messages. It wasn't a crash. It was an unraveling. The traffic simulation for Tokyo dissolved into chaos as the lights on the grid ceased to follow their programming, not because the code was gone, but because the underlying concepts of stop and go were being eroded. The communications network maps showed thousands of connections blinking out, the data packets simply ceasing their journey, their purpose, erased mid-transit. The world's intricate, hyper-connected digital nervous system was having a stroke. And Akane Shinjo, the self-proclaimed master of this digital universe, could only watch as it all turned to meaningless static. She saw the repeating hexadecimal signature from earlier, no longer a faint anomaly but a raging pandemic, spreading through every system like a digital plague. It wasn't inserting new code. It was leaving behind a vacuum where code used to be. This is not possible, she whispered, her voice a mixture of fury and awe. This was not the work of a human hacker. This was a violation of the fundamental laws of information theory. It was a ghost in the machine, a sentient entropy that was unwriting the world. And she, for the first time in her life, was utterly powerless against it. The feeling was as alien and unpleasant as the organic chaos of the world outside her window. The air in Naruto's shop was still and calm, a stark contrast to the conceptual hurricane raging through the city's digital infrastructure. Rikka was practicing the exercise from the archive, trying to hold the perfect, multi-sensory image of a single drop of rain in her mind. She could almost feel its coolness, its weight, the way it would distort the light passing through it. Naruto stood by the main window, his back to her, looking out at the perfectly normal, rain-free street. He was as still as the impossible artifacts that surrounded him, but Rikka could feel a tension in the air, a low hum of power that had not been there moments before. "The attack has begun," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the wooden floor. "It is larger than the one at the cafe. More ambitious." Rikka opened her eyes, the image of the raindrop dissolving. What is it this time? What are they erasing? Not a memory of a place, but the memory of a function, Naruto explained, turning to face her. His blue eyes were stormier than usual, focused on something far beyond the confines of the shop. Value, connection, purpose. The abstract concepts that allow your modern world to function. The shared fiction that money has worth, that a red light means stop, that a digital signal is meant to reach a destination. The null is attacking the very syntax of your society. He walked over to a large, ornate silver mirror that hung on one wall. It displayed no reflection, only a swirling, gray mist. The nexus of the attack is the Argus Corporation Tower. It houses one of the most powerful information hubs on the planet. If it falls, the conceptual collapse will cascade globally within minutes. Argus. Rikka recognized the name. The company was a monolith, their logo on everything from phones to private satellites. So, what do we do? Do we go there? We do, Naruto said. But your role will be different this time. You cannot anchor the entire global network from the outside. You must go to the source. You must enter the core network and become a conceptual firewall. You will hold the idea of connection and value in place while the system is repaired around you. Enter the network, like with a computer. Naruto gave a small, enigmatic smile. Of a sort, your consciousness is the key, Rikka. You are the one who can navigate the space between what is real and what is merely agreed upon. For you, The digital world is not just code. It is a place. And I will open the door. He placed his hand on the misty surface of the mirror. The gray mist swirled and then solidified, the image on its surface shifting with dizzying speed. It zoomed through the streets of Tokyo, a phantom's eye view. Until it flew up the sheer glass face of a colossal skyscraper, the Argus Tower, impossibly encased in a raging, localized blizzard. The mirror's view passed through the glass all at the building's peak and into a stark white and chrome office, focusing on a young woman with sharp, intelligent features and short, dark hair, who was staring at a screen of dying data with an expression of intense, frustrated disbelief. That is Akane Shinjo, Naruto said. The architect. She is a genius of the highest order, the builder of the very system that is now collapsing. She perceives the null as a logical paradox, an enemy to be dissected and understood. She is already fighting, in her own way. We will need her logic to complement your will. But how do we even get in? Rikka asked, gesturing to the swirling snowstorm in the mirror. Naruto simply tapped the glass. We will take a shortcut. The world dissolved into a sickening, gray lurch. It was not like stepping through the door to the archive. This was a forced, violent transition, a feeling of being squeezed through an impossibly small crack in reality. For a terrifying instant, Rikka felt her body and consciousness come apart. Reduced to a stream of pure information, before being slammed back together with a gut-wrenching jolt. They were standing in the center of Akane Shinjo's office. The blizzard raged endlessly on the other side of the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air was cold and sterile. Akane whirled around, her hand instinctively flying to a control panel on her desk. A series of chrome panels in the ceiling slid open, revealing advanced-looking automated defense turrets. They hummed, charged, and aimed directly at Naruto and Rikka. Identify yourselves. Akane's voice was sharp, a weapon in itself. Her eyes, a dark, piercing obsidian, darted between them, analyzing, cataloging threats. The tower is in full lockdown. Sub-level doors are shielded. The elevator shafts are magnetized. It is physically impossible for you to be here. The word, impossible, is perhaps more flexible than your worldview allows for. Architect Shinjo, Naruto said calmly, seemingly unconcerned by the weaponry aimed at his head. You know my title, she stated, her eyes narrowing. You are connected to the anomaly. It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion. You are the source of the hexadecimal ghost. We are here to help you stop it. Rikka said, finding her voice despite the terrifyingly intelligent woman and the guns pointed at her. Akane let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of humor. Help me. You are a walking paradox. A violation of known physics. You are not a solution. You are a variable I cannot account for. Daedalus, run facial recognition. Cross-reference with every database, public and classified. Less than no match, architect. Greater than the AI's voice chimed in her ear. Less than these individuals do not appear to exist. Their biometric signatures are anomalous. The males is generating a bioelectric field that defies thermodynamic principles. Greater than. Akane's expression flickered with a predatory curiosity. An impossible energy field. A true unknown. The network is collapsing, she said, her attention shifting back to the dying screens. Conceptual data degradation. It's an attack on the symbolic layer. It shouldn't be possible. And yet, it is happening, Naruto said. We can give you the tool to fight it. But you will have to be willing to accept a paradigm you do not understand. He looked at Rikka. She is the tool. She can act as a conceptual anchor within the network's core. Akane stared at Rikka, her gaze analytical and dismissive. She's a teenager. What is she going to do? Feel very strongly about the importance of TCP/IP protocols. Yes, Naruto said, without a trace of irony. That is precisely what she is going to do. He turned to Rikka. It is time. The space you are about to enter is not physical. It is a landscape of pure information. Do not try to make sense of it. Just be. Find the core, and hold on to the concepts I told you of. Be the lighthouse in the storm. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and she felt a surge of warmth, a feeling of profound, unshakable stability that settled deep in her bones. I will shield you from the worst of the feedback. Rikka nodded, her heart hammering. She looked at the main holographic display, at the dying river of data. She closed her eyes and focused. Not on an apple or a raindrop, but on the feeling of connection. The simple, profound idea of one thing reaching another. The world vanished in a blast of static and light. When she opened her eyes again, she was standing on a platform of glowing, crystalline circuitry. Below her was a chasm of pure, silent blackness. Above her, a sky of shimmering, iridescent light pulsed in time with a slow, deep hum. Great rivers of light, streams of pure data, flowed through the air around her, forming highways and arteries of information that crisscrossed in the infinite space. Some were brilliant white, others electric blue or vibrant green. It was beautiful. It was a cathedral of pure logic. She was inside the Argus network. She was experiencing it as a place. But something was wrong. In the distance, some of the great rivers of light were flickering and dying. The data streams would flow into a section of the sky and simply end, dissipating into gray, meaningless static. It was like watching the lights of a city go out, one by one. Silent, dead canyons were forming where the busiest intersections of information used to be. The deep, resonant hum of the network was being replaced by a discordant, high-pitched whine, the sound of a system in agony. Back in the pinnacle, Akane watched in stunned disbelief. Rikka had not moved, but her eyes were closed, and a faint golden aura was shimmering around her. On the main screen, a new icon had appeared in the 3D topology of the network core. It was a small, golden sun, a source of energy that defied every diagnostic she possessed. It was emitting no heat, no radiation, no electricity. It was emitting stability. What is she doing? Akane breathed, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her tactical caution. She is reminding your system of what it is, Naruto said quietly, his eyes also closed, his hand still on Rikka's shoulder. Within the digital landscape, Rikka focused her will. She reached out with her consciousness and projected the concept of connection. She didn't just think the word, she felt it. She felt the satisfaction of a letter reaching its destination, of a phone call connecting, of two hands clasping. She poured that absolute, unwavering belief into the network. From her position on the crystalline platform, a wave of golden light pulsed outward. It was not an attack. It was a resonance, a harmonic frequency. When it touched the dying data streams, they flickered back to life, their light brightening. The gray static receded from the edges of the golden wave. Akane saw it on her screen. The areas around the anomalous golden sun were stabilizing. The data degradation was reversing in that local sector. It was impossible. It was illogical. But it was happening. A tool. Naruto had called her a tool. Akane's mind, faster than any processor, began to work. She couldn't understand the source of the energy, but she could analyze its effect. It was creating a localized field of conceptual integrity. A safe harbor in the entropic storm. Her fingers flew across her holographic keyboard, the light construct clattering under the speed of her assault. Daedalus, I can't fight the degradation head-on. But I can use her stable field as a foundation. Isolate the core logic nodes. Reroute all critical system functions through the stabilized zone. We'll build a fortress around her anchor and reboot the network from there. Less than the calculations are unconventional, architect. But the probability of success is non-zero, greater than the AI stated. Do it, she commanded. Inside the network, Rikka felt a shift. New pathways of light began to form around her, converging on her position. They were brighter, more focused than the others. She could feel the intent behind them, Akane's fierce, brilliant logic. Using her as a fulcrum. It was a strange, intimate sensation, having another mind work in tandem with hers, even without direct communication. She pushed her own power out harder, expanding the golden zone of stability, giving Akane more room to work. The null fought back. A wave of absolute silence and static rolled towards her, a tidal wave of negation. Rikka braced herself, reinforcing her golden shield with the concept of value. She pictured the stock market, not as numbers, but as the representation of human effort, of creation, of the combined work of millions of people. She gave that abstract concept a tangible weight, a reality, a meaning that the null could not simply erase. The wave of static crashed against her golden shield and broke apart, dissipating into harmlessness. On Akane's screen, a massive spike of the hexadecimal ghost signature appeared, tried to overwhelm the golden sun, and then vanished, repelled. A grin, sharp and predatory, finally broke across Akane Shinjo's face. She had an enemy she could measure. She had a weapon she could use. "We have it," she announced. "The system is stabilizing. I'm purging the corrupted nodes and re-instantiating from the core." Slowly, the rivers of light in the digital sky began to flow with their old brilliance. The discordant whine faded, replaced once again by the deep, powerful hum of a system working in perfect harmony. Rikka felt the pressure recede. The fight was over. The exhaustion hit her like a physical blow, and the world of light and circuitry dissolved. She was back in the cold, sterile office. The golden aura around her fading. She stumbled, and Naruto caught her, his steadying presence the only thing keeping her upright. Akane Shinjo was silent. She looked from her screens, which now showed a perfectly stable, functioning network, to the pale, exhausted girl leaning on the impossible man. She had just witnessed an event that fundamentally broke her understanding of the universe. Her life's work had been saved by something akin to magic. The turrets in the ceiling silently retracted. "Your methods are unscientific," Akane said, her voice quiet, clinical, but laced with a new, burning curiosity. "The energy signature she generated is not derived from any known particle or force. It is a conceptual projection. A literal ghost in the machine." She walked over, her obsidian eyes locking onto Naruto. Your bio-signature. It's not a field in spacetime, it's a field that seems to be generating the spacetime around it. A localized constant, an anchor." Her gaze was intense, the look of a theorist who has just found proof of a whole new branch of physics. "I need to study you. I need to understand." Her obsession had a new, clear target. It was no longer just about the anomaly. It was about him. Before Naruto could respond, Akane's eyes flickered to a side monitor. "Wait, the degradation is gone, but the ghost signature, a fragment of it remains. It's dormant. I've isolated it in a quantum server." Her mind was already racing. "I can analyze it, reverse engineer it." "That would be unwise," Naruto said, his tone carrying a note of warning. But Akane was already moving, her fingers flying once more. "My tower, my network. I will understand the nature of the weapon used against me." Her satellite network, a private constellation far more advanced than any government's, was already working on a new task. While she had been fighting the null, a part of her system had been dedicated to backtracing the energy signature of their arrival. It had been instantaneous, a rip in space. But it had left a residue, an echo. An image appeared on her main screen. It was a satellite view, rapidly zooming in on a small, unassuming district in Tokyo. It focused on a narrow alley. And in that alley, between a laundromat and an apartment building, was a tiny, dark wooded shop that did not appear on any city records or maps. A shop with a single, impossible sign. The hourglass. Akane looked from the image on the screen to Naruto, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. Her world of cold logic and hard data had just been shattered, and in its place was a mystery of infinite, fascinating depth. She had a target. She had a name. And Akane Shinjo always dissected her subjects. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Unmoving Watchers. The transition was not a tear in reality nor a cascade of data, but a gentle, seamless folding of the world. One moment, they were in the sterile, ozone-scented air of the Argus Tower's service level, the next, they stood in a forest so ancient it seemed to predate the very concept of time. The air here was heavy and cool, thick with the scent of thousand-year-old cedar trees, damp earth, and the clean, sharp fragrance of a recent rain. Sunlight, where it managed to pierce the dense canopy of emerald leaves, fell in dappled, shifting columns, like spotlights in a vast, silent cathedral. The only sounds were the whisper of wind through the high branches and the distant, meditative call of a single cicada. Rikka, who had been bracing for another gut-wrenching spatial shift, found the quiet arrival almost more disorienting. She looked at her surroundings in awe. Moss, thick and plush as velvet, carpeted the ground and the gnarled roots of the colossal trees. Stone lanterns, covered in a patina of green and gray, stood like silent sentinels along a barely visible path of flat, river-worn stones. There was a palpable weight to the silence here, a sense of accumulated centuries pressing down. "Where are we?" she whispered, the sound seeming sacrilegiously loud in the profound stillness. "The Miyamoto Shrine," Naruto answered, his voice a low murmur that blended with the rustle of the leaves. Or rather, the forest that guards it. To most people, this is a section of the Nagano Prefectural Park. They can walk these paths for days and see nothing but trees. The shrine itself occupies a space that is adjacent to this one. It must be approached with the proper respect, or it will not be found at all. As if on cue, two figures emerged from the dappled shadows ahead. They were women, dressed in the immaculate white hitatare and flowing red hakama of Shinto priestesses. The elder of the two, a woman with a face like a wrinkled apple and hair the color of spun snow, held a gnarled oak staff. The younger, barely older than Rikka herself, had a serene, almost unnervingly composed face and long, straight black hair that fell like a sheet of polished obsidian down her back. They moved with a silent, practiced grace, their bare feet making no sound on the mossy stones. They stopped a respectful distance away and bowed, their movements perfectly synchronized. Azure Dragon, the younger priestess said, her voice clear and melodic, like the chime of a small, crystal bell. She did not look at Naruto's face, but rather at a point just above his head, as if she were perceiving something Rikka could not. Your presence honors this sacred ground. We have been expecting you. The elder woman said nothing, but her dark, bird-like eyes flickered from Naruto to Rikka, and her gaze was sharp and critical, missing nothing. Miyamoto Kasumi Dono, Naruto replied, inclining his head in a gesture of respect that seemed both ancient and natural. Your senses are as keen as the prophecies foretold. This was Kasumi Miyamoto. Rikka studied her. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional, flashy way of a model or an idol. Her beauty was in her stillness, her absolute and unwavering poise. She carried herself with the weight of someone who had conversed with things far older than cedar trees. This was no mere priestess, she was the oracle Naruto had spoken of. Kasumi's gaze finally shifted, settling on Rikka. It was not a hostile look, but it was intensely analytical, as if she were reading the very fabric of Rikka's soul. And this is the girl, she stated, a simple observation that carried the weight of a pronouncement. The hero of hope, she is younger than the visions suggested, and her spirit is yet untempered. She is a vessel being filled, Naruto corrected gently. Her potential is the reason we are here. The old woman finally spoke, her voice a dry rustle, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. Potential is a seed, Lord Dragon. It is not the tree. This ground is hallowed by centuries of discipline and sacrifice. We do not suffer the untempered and the unproven lightly. Her sharp eyes were fixed on Rikka, and Rikka felt a profound sense of being judged and found wanting. Chiyoba is the head of our order's elders, Kasumi explained, her tone neutral. Her caution is the bedrock upon which our traditions are built. Please, follow us. The council of elders awaits. They led them along the winding stone path. As they walked, Rikka noticed the air beginning to shimmer, the trees at the edge of her vision seeming to blur and warp. It was a subtle, optical illusion, as if they were walking through a layer of intense heat, but the air remained cool. She realized they were passing through the veil Naruto had mentioned, crossing from the mundane world into the true space of the shrine. The forest thinned abruptly, opening into a wide, immaculately raked gravel courtyard. In the center stood the shrine complex. It was a sprawling series of interconnected buildings. Their unpainted hinoki wood aged to a silvery gray. The swooping lines of the tiled roofs were elegant and severe, designed to mimic the shape of the surrounding mountains. The air was thick with the clean, spicy scent of burning incense. Unlike the frantic, crowded shrines of the city, this place was utterly silent, devoid of any other people. It felt less like a place of worship and more like a fortress of faith. They were led into the largest of the buildings, the Hayden, or Hall of Worship. The interior was dark and cool, the space vast and empty save for the massive, polished wooden pillars that supported the high, vaulted ceiling. At the far end of the hall, seated on tatami mats in a perfect, straight line, were 6 elders, 3 men and 3 women, all with the same severe, unyielding expressions as the old woman, Chiyo. They sat with ramrod straight backs, their hands folded in their laps, their collective gaze a palpable force in the room. This was not a meeting, it was an inquest. Kasumi and Chiyo took their places at the head of the line of elders, and Naruto and Rikka were gestured to sit on silk cushions placed in the center of the vast, empty room. The distance between them and the elders felt like a mile. The world trembles, One of the male elders began, his voice deep and resonant. The spiritual wards we have maintained for 12 NDRED years report a sickness in the flow of ki. A thinning of the world's substance. The prophecies of the unraveling begin to stir. And now you appear in our sacred forest, Azure Dragon, just as the oldest texts predicted. He paused, his gaze hardening. The texts are unclear. They name you as the Fulcrum, a being of immense power who will either be the architect of salvation or the harbinger of the Great Silence. A force that will either mend the world or shatter it in the process. I am here to mend, Naruto stated, his voice calm and even, easily filling the vast hall. The girl, Rikka Takarada, is the instrument of that mending. She is the hero your order has been waiting for. Chio scoffed, a small, sharp sound. She is a child of the outer world. A product of steel and glass and fleeting noise. Her spirit is awash in the meaningless static of her age. The hero is meant to be a figure of supreme spiritual discipline, one of us, tempered in the fires of tradition and ritual. Not an outsider. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rikka felt 100 eyes on her, picking her apart. These people, with their ancient traditions and unshakable conviction, saw her as a contamination. Beside her, Naruto remained perfectly serene, a mountain of calm in the face of their rigid dogma. It was Kasumi who spoke, her voice cutting through the rising hostility. The prophecies did not say the hero would be one of us, Chiyo-ba. They said she would be an anomaly. That her spirit would be anchored to the mundane world, yet resonate with the language of creation. Does this not describe her? She was looking at Naruto as she spoke, a silent question in her eyes. It does, Naruto confirmed. Visions can be misinterpreted, another elder countered. We require proof, a sign. If this girl is to be the champion against the unraveling, she must be tested. She must undergo the trial of unmasking. A murmur went through the elders. The trial was clearly something of great significance. And judging by the grim expressions, something profoundly difficult. Chio nodded slowly. Yes, the trial. Only a soul of perfect clarity and unwavering purpose can complete it. It will show us the truth of her heart. If she is worthy, she will succeed. If she is not, she left the alternative hanging in the air. What is this trial? Rikka asked, her own voice sounding small and defiant in the imposing space. Kasumi turned to her, her expression unreadable. It is not a trial of strength or endurance. The shrine is built over a spiritual nexus, a place where the barrier between the physical world and the world of thought and emotion is thin. The trial requires you to enter the chamber of echoes. Inside, the chamber will reflect not your physical self, but your inner self. It will manifest your deepest fears, your most profound doubts, your most secret shames. You must walk through these manifestations, these echoes of your own soul, and reach the center of the chamber without being overcome by them. It is a journey through the landscape of your own heart. To succeed, you must face yourself, all of yourself, and accept it without flinching. Rikka's blood ran cold. Face her deepest fears, her doubts. She thought of the insidious whispers of the null, how it had used her own feelings of hollowness against her. This trial sounded like a formal invitation for that to happen all over again, but without Naruto's direct aid. It was terrifying, but as she looked at the stern, disapproving faces of the elders, a spark of defiance ignited within her. They saw her as weak. As a contaminated outsider, she would not let them be right. I'll do it, she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even herself. Naruto placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You will not be alone, he said softly, for only her to hear. I cannot interfere, but my power will shield the chamber, ensuring that only your echoes can manifest. The new LL will not be able to whisper in your ear this time. This is a battle you must fight, but you will fight it on fair ground. The elders led them from the main hall, through a series of covered walkways that connected the various shrine buildings. They arrived at a small, windowless structure at the very back of the complex, nestled against a sheer cliff face. The door was a single, heavy slab of unadorned wood. The air around it felt strangely distorted, making Rikka feel slightly nauseous. The Chamber of Echoes, Kasumi announced. Enter alone. When you reach the Shimenawa, the sacred rope, in the center, the trial is complete. We will be outside, meditating. We will know if you succeed. Rikka took a deep breath, gave Naruto one last, nervous glance, and pushed the heavy door open. It swung inward with a low groan, revealing a space of absolute, impenetrable darkness. She stepped inside, and the door boomed shut behind her, plunging her into a silence even more profound than that of the forest. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the sound of her own frantic heartbeat in the oppressive dark. Then, slowly, the space began to change. The darkness coalesced, taking on shape and form. She was no longer in a small, wooden chamber. She was in her middle school classroom. A group of girls stood in a circle, whispering. Rikka recognized them. They were the popular girls, the ones who had always treated her with a polite but distinct coolness. As she watched, a younger version of herself, awkward and hesitant, tried to join their conversation. "Oh, Takarada-san," one of the girls said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We were just talking about the concert this weekend. It's probably not your kind of thing." The younger Rikka just stood there, a pained smile frozen on her face. Before slinking away, the real Rikka flinched. It was a small, stupid memory, a minor social humiliation from years ago. But the chamber amplified the feeling, the sting of rejection, the shame of not fitting in. It washed over her in a suffocating wave. "You've always been on the outside, haven't you?" A voice whispered. It was her own voice, laced with self-pity. "Always watching, never belonging. You're just empty." The scene shifted. Now she was at home, at the dinner table. Her parents were there, but they weren't speaking to her. They were talking to each other, through her, about their work, their schedules, their worries. She was a ghost at her own family table, a piece of furniture. The feeling wasn't rejection, it was worse. It was irrelevance. "They love you," her own voice whispered again. This time with a sharp, cruel edge. "But they don't really see you. You're just a part of the routine. A responsibility. If you vanished, their lives wouldn't really change that much, would they?" The doubt was a physical pain in her chest. The chamber was taking her deepest, most private anxieties and giving them voice and form. She felt her resolve begin to crumble. The whispers were right. She was hollow. She was irrelevant. Who was she to be a hero? She stumbled forward through the shifting, painful memories. Her failure with the apple in the archive. A time she had lied to Namiko about being sick because she was afraid to go to a party. Every small failure, every moment of weakness, was replayed for her, the accompanying emotions amplified 100-fold. The air grew thick with shame and regret. She felt herself sinking, drowning in her own inadequacy. It was then that she remembered Naruto's words from her training. Hope is not a feeling. It is a choice. It is a rebellion against despair. And if hope was a choice, then what about self-worth? What if that was a choice, too? She stopped. The scene around her was now a swirling vortex of her own anxious thoughts, a tempest of self-doubt. She closed her eyes and took a breath. "Okay," she said aloud, her voice trembling but clear in the psychic chaos. "You're right. I am on the outside sometimes. And maybe I am quiet and my parents are busy. And maybe I'm not the bravest or the most confident person. Maybe I am a little bit hollow." She opened her eyes, facing the swirling manifestations of her fear. "But that's not all I am." She thought of her anger, her fierce, possessive grief over the loss of Café Septième. That wasn't hollowness. That was passion. She thought of her decision to stand with Naruto. To fight a battle she couldn't comprehend. That wasn't irrelevance. That was courage. She thought of the searing, triumphant moment she had recreated the cherry blossom, not just saving a memory but making it stronger. That wasn't emptiness. That was power. The manifestations of her fears seemed to recoil slightly, their power diminishing as she refused to be cowed by them. She was not denying their truth. She was accepting it, but refusing to let it define her. "I might be flawed," she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. "But I'm also the person who stood up to an ancient, cosmic entity to save a memory. I'm the person who anchored an entire financial network with my will. I am the hero of hope, because when everything falls apart, I'm the one who remembers. That is not nothing. That is who I am." As she spoke the final words, a brilliant, golden light erupted from her chest. It was not the soft, warm light of the cherry blossom petal. This was a fierce, defiant light. The light of self-actualization. The light of a purpose discovered. The swirling darkness of the chamber was burned away by its radiance, and she saw, not 10 feet in front of her, a thick, sacred rope made of woven rice straw, the Shimenawa, hanging in the center of the now empty room. She walked forward, her steps sure and steady, and placed her hand upon it. The trial was over. Outside, the elders sat in silent meditation. Suddenly, a wave of pure, golden spiritual energy washed out from the chamber of echoes. It was not the gentle, disciplined key of their own order. It was something wilder, more fundamental, yet astonishingly powerful. The elders gasped, their eyes flying open. Kasumi rose to her feet, her serene composure broken by a look of sheer, unadulterated awe. She stared at the door of the chamber, her spiritual senses reeling from the force of Rikka's will. Naruto, who had been leaning against a pillar with his eyes closed, allowed a small, proud smile to grace his lips. The heavy door creaked open, and Rikka stepped out, blinking in the sunlight. She looked different. The subtle hesitation in her posture was gone. The faint, searching look in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, solid confidence. She had not been remade, but she had been settled. The untempered spirit had been plunged into the forge of her own soul and had emerged as steel. Chio, the old woman, stared at her, her mouth slightly agape. She saw not a child of the outer world, but a warrior who had just won the most difficult of all battles, the one against oneself. Kasumi Miyamoto approached Rikka, her steps slow and reverent. She bowed, a deep, profound gesture of respect that stunned the other elders into silence. "You have our allegiance, hero of hope," she said, her voice filled with a new, fervent conviction. "Your spirit is brighter than any I have ever witnessed. My order, my life, is at your disposal." Her gaze then shifted to Naruto, and the awe in her eyes deepened into something else. Something closer to worship. Her spiritual sight, which had always allowed her to see the auras and ki of living things, was showing her something impossible when she looked at him. She did not see a man. She saw a shape in the form of a man, but the shape itself was a window. And through that window, she saw infinity. She saw the calm, slow, majestic turning of galaxies. She saw the birth and death of stars. She saw the vast, patient, and ordered mind of the universe itself, wearing a human face. He was not a god. He was the reason the concept of divinity existed in the first place. He was a living, breathing piece of the sacred, an embodiment of the very order her clan had sworn to protect. A schism was born in that moment. Kasumi, the oracle, had declared her absolute faith in the outsiders. But the faces of some of the elders, including Chio, remained hard and unconvinced. They had seen Rikka's power, but their traditions were rigid. An alliance had been forged, but a new, internal conflict had just begun within the heart of Japan's most ancient mystical order. Kasumi, however, had made her choice. She approached Naruto, her head still bowed. "Lord Dragon," she said, her voice unwavering. "My visions have become clearer. The unraveling has a focal point, a goal. I have seen an image, a whisper of its next target." She took a small, woven charm from her sleeve and handed it to Rikka. It was an omamori, a protective amulet, but Rikka could feel a faint, warm pulse emanating from it. "This will react when the thinning begins. It will give you a warning." "What did you see?" Naruto asked. Kasumi looked up, her dark eyes filled with a grim certainty. "I saw a battlefield, but the soldiers were not flesh and blood. They were made of steel and wires. And they were fighting not an enemy, but the very concept of their own existence. It was a concrete jungle, a place of hardened soldiers and cold, hard logic. The warning was clear. The Null's next target would be a world utterly alien to this place of faith and tradition. It was a world of tactics, of weapons, of soldiers. And it was a world where another powerful, skeptical woman was already waiting, watching, and doubting. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Concrete Jungle and the Steel Demon. The air was a suffocating mix of cold seawater, rust, and the electric tang of ozone. Every sound was amplified and distorted in the echoing concrete labyrinth, a symphony of chaos conducted by the typhoon raging 100 meters above. Water, forced up from the bay by the storm's surge, gushed through breaches in the tunnel walls, creating treacherous, knee-deep rivers that swirled with debris. The distant, tortured groan of twisting steel was a constant bass note, a reminder that the abandoned substructure beneath Tokyo Station was slowly losing its fight with the storm. For Staff Sergeant Reina Kageyama, codename Oni, it was just another Tuesday. Basilisk, this is Oni. Sit rep, she spoke into her throat mic. Her voice a clipped, steady contralto that betrayed no hint of the chaos around her. A heads-up display flickered to life across the inside of her combat visor, overlaying the grim reality of the tunnel with cool blue tactical data. Less than Oni, we're reading you 5x5, greater than the voice of her tactical coordinator, a man she knew only as Basilisk, crackled in her earpiece. Less than the anomaly's energy signature is spiking. Approximately 75 meters from your position, bearing 090. Sub-level C7. Be advised, we're seeing significant spatial distortion in the area. The blueprints are unreliable. Greater than. Copy. Reina grunted, shifting the grip on her weapon, a state-of-the-art SDRU modular assault rifle designated Jormungandr. It was a sleek, brutalist piece of engineering, capable of firing anything from hypervelocity flechettes to programmable micro-grenades. Unreliable is my middle name. She moved with a lethal economy of motion, her augmented musculature allowing her to wade through the rushing water as if it were a gentle stream. Her entire body was a weapon system. Carbon nanotube plating was woven beneath her black combat suit, her optical sensors could see in 6 different spectra including the esoteric energy of the anomalies, and her reaction time was measured in picoseconds. She was the pinnacle of the Special Disaster Response Unit's answer to a woe RLD that had stopped making sense, a human sledgehammer, engineered to smash paradoxes back into submission. The paradox in question was a Type 3 conceptual anomaly. A manifestation. The lower-level null events were passive, erasures, memory wipes, glitches in the matrix. The Type 3s were different. They were aggressive. They were what happened when the null devoured so many concepts in one place that it became something else. A cancerous, paradoxical entity that tore a hole in the physical world. This one had been drawn to the chaos of the typhoon, a predator attracted to the scent of disorder. Rounding a corner, she saw the source of the spatial distortion. The concrete wall of the main service conduit ahead of her was wrong. It seemed to ripple and warp, the solid concrete flowing like liquid for a moment before snapping back into place. A low, guttural clicking sound echoed from the chamber beyond, a sound that grated on the ears and set her teeth on edge. Reina raised her rifle, the smart scope linking to her visor, painting a targeting reticle over the shimmering doorway. Basilisk, I am making entry. Less than proceed with extreme caution, Oni. And remember the secondary objective. If the URWs show up, prioritize capture. High Command wants them alive. Greater than. Capture is a luxury. Survival is a priority, she retorted, before kicking on her suit's short burst grav dampeners and striding through the unstable portal. The chamber on the other side was a vast, circular maintenance hub where a dozen tunnels converged. In the center, crouched like some obscene, multi-limbed insect, was the beast. It was a creature that defied description because it was made of defiance itself. Its body was a chaotic amalgamation of things that had been erased. A limb that looked like twisted B-way track scraped against the floor next to an arm made of flickering, silent television static. Its torso was a shifting mass of what looked like solidified, glitching data, chunks of asphalt, and the ghostly, translucent shapes of office furniture. It had no head, only a swirling vortex of absolute blackness where a head should be, a direct, physical manifestation of the null. This was the Steel Demon, as the SDRU had unofficially nicknamed it, and it was leaking raw, conceptual poison into the world. Target acquired, Reina stated calmly, the Jormungandr's targeting laser painting a red dot on the creature's unstable torso. Engaging. She opened fire. A stream of armor-piercing, depleted uranium rounds screamed across the chamber. The effect was not what she expected. Some of the round DS struck the subway track limb with a shriek of ricocheting metal. Others hit the static arm and simply vanished, their kinetic energy and physical form erased from existence a millisecond before impact. The rest hit the torso and were absorbed without effect, like stones thrown into a swamp. The beast let out a shriek that was not a sound, but a wave of pure conceptual dread that washed over her. It was the feeling of being forgotten. Reina's systems immediately counteracted it, flooding her brain with chemical stabilizers and a burst of white noise to disrupt the psychic attack. Her training held. Her will held. It doesn't follow the rules, she thought, a flicker of professional frustration cutting through her combat focus. Fine, I don't need it to. She switched firing modes, launching a volley of plasma grenades. They detonated in a series of brilliant, searing flashes, engulfing the creature in a miniature sun. For a moment, she thought it had worked. But as the light faded, the beast was still there, unharmed. The very concept of heat in its immediate vicinity had been temporarily nullified. The plasma had been rendered inert. Basilisk, conventional and energy-based ordnance are having minimal effect, she reported, backpedaling as the creature surged towards her, its mismatched limbs scrabbling against the concrete. Recommend re-evaluating engagement protocols. The steel demon lashed out with its static arm. Reina's combat reflexes were supernatural. She threw herself sideways, the grav dampeners giving her an impossible burst of speed. The arm passed through the space where she had been, and the section of concrete wall behind it flickered out of existence, leaving a perfectly smooth, featureless gray patch where reinforced concrete had been moments before. Not destroyed, unmade. This was not a fight of attrition. This was a battle against a living, delete, key. She landed in a crouch, already switching to her last resort, a single, experimental, ontological, round. A bullet designed not to cause physical damage, but to violently impose a localized, temporary burst of rigid physical law. It was supposed to force a paradoxical entity to choose a single, stable state of being. It was untested, unpredictable, and her last shot at winning this on her own terms. She took aim, lining up a shot with the swirling black vortex that served as its head. But the beast was too fast. It lunged, its subway track limbs swinging down like a colossal, rusty axe. Reina had no time to dodge. She brought the Jormungandr up, its reinforced frame the only thing between her and oblivion. The impact was cataclysmic. The sound of metal screaming under impossible pressure filled the chamber. Reina was thrown back a dozen meters, her arm shattering under the force despite her suit's kinetic dampeners. The Jormungandr was bent into a useless crescent of high-tech scrap. Pain, sharp and blinding, exploded in her shoulder. Her HUD flickered and died as her systems struggled to reboot from the impact. She was disarmed, injured, and vulnerable. The steel demon loomed over her, its vortex head swirling, ready to erase her. This was it, a mission failure, a short, violent, and ultimately meaningless career, ending in a wet, dark hole under Tokyo. A grimly pragmatic part of her brain was already calculating the statistical probability of her survival, 0. And then, they appeared. They did not run in or drop from the ceiling. They simply stepped into being, coalescing from the shadows at the edge of the chamber as if they had been there all along. N in a simple black turtleneck and a teenage girl in a school uniform, looking completely, absurdly out of place. The URWs, High Command's primary targets. The man, Naruto, looked at the looming beast, then at Reina. And a flicker of something that might have been mild annoyance crossed his handsome features. The girl, Rikka, looked terrified but resolute, her hands clenched into fists at her side. In one hand, she clutched a small, woven charm that was glowing with a gentle, pulsing warmth. Kasumi Miyamoto's warning. The steel demon paused, its non-head turning towards the new arrivals, sensing a different kind of reality. A different kind of threat. It was the opening Reina needed. Ignoring the fire in her shoulder, she rolled, drew her sidearm, a heavy caliber pistol that fired gravity pulse slugs, and opened fire. Not at the beast, but at the newcomers. URWs, on your knees. You are under arrest by order of the SDRU. She yelled, her voice hoarse with pain. Duty first, always. The slugs, designed to incapacitate a target with a localized gravity well, flew across the room. Naruto didn't even look at them. He raised one hand, and the slugs simply stopped in midair, a foot from his face, their inner mechanics frozen. Their energy dissipated. He gave them a dismissive flick of his fingers, and they clattered harmlessly to the floor. Reina stared in disbelief. That was not a shield. That was not a countermeasure. That was a casual negation of physics. I believe we have a more pressing matter to attend to, Naruto said, his calm voice cutting through the din of the storm and the creature's psychic hum. The steel demon, seeming to decide that Naruto was the greater threat, let out another silent scream and charged at him. Rikka cried out in warning, but Naruto stood his ground. He met the charging, paradoxical monstrosity with a single, outstretched palm. There was no sound of impact. No explosion. Just a silent, shimmering wall of force, a golden ripple in the air, that stopped the creature's full multi-ton charge dead. The beast, an entity of pure chaos, had just run into a concept it could not erase, absolute order. Rikka, now, Naruto commanded, his arm not even trembling under the strain. It is a creature of negation. You cannot simply reinforce what is there. You must give it something new. A definition. Force it to be something. Rikka nodded, her eyes squeezed shut in concentration. Reina watched, her tactical mind struggling to process the scene. A man holding back a reality-devouring monster with one hand. A schoolgirl preparing to, what? Think at it. It was insane. And yet, it was happening. This was her chance. Her orders were to capture. While they were distracted, she could flank them. Use her remaining ontological round. But a different instinct, the instinct of a soldier who recognizes a superior weapon on the battlefield, stayed her hand. The steel demon was the primary threat. It had almost killed her. Her personal pistol wasn't going to scratch it. Her only chance, the city's only chance, was these two anomalies. Pragmatism won out over protocol. I'll cover you, Reina yelled, pushing herself to her feet, her broken arm hanging uselessly at her side. She fired her pistol at the beast's legs, the gravity pulses doing little damage but causing the creature to stumble, momentarily relieving the pressure on Naruto. Whatever you're going to do it fast. Naruto glanced at her, a flicker of surprise and approval in his blue eyes. Rikka focused, a golden aura, faint at first, then growing in intensity, surrounding her. She reached into her mind. Not for a memory, but for a fundamental concept. A law. She pictured a rock. She pictured it falling. She pictured the unyielding, absolute reality of gravity. The simple, brutal, and universal truth of consequence. The idea that for every action, there is a reaction. That an object cannot simply cease to be. You are real, she projected, her will a lance of pure concept. UAL force aimed at the heart of the beast. You are made of matter. You have mass. You are bound by the laws of this world. You will not erase. You will break. The steel demon shrieked, a true, audible sound this time. A horrific shriek of grinding metal and digital feedback. Its form began to stabilize. The flickering TV static solidified into a gray, crystalline substance. The ghostly office furniture became solid, heavy wood. The subway track limb became heavier, its rust flaking off. Rikka was forcing it to become a cohesive, physical object. She was revoking its license to cheat reality. The beast struggled, its paradoxical nature fighting against the imposition of order. The vortex of its head began to spin faster, trying to erase the concept that was imprisoning it. It's fighting back, Rikka gasped, the strain showing on her face. I can't. Its core is the negation, Reina shouted, her tactical brain finally having a problem it could solve. If the creature was now a physical object, it could be physically destroyed. The vortex. If you can make its head solid, I can destroy it. Naruto nodded. Focus everything on that single point, Rikka. Define it. Rikka poured every ounce of her will, every scrap of her newfound confidence, into that one task. She didn't just impose the concept of solidity on the vortex, she gave it a definition. You are obsidian, she thought, picturing the polished black stone of the grandfather clock in Naruto's shop. You are hard. You are brittle. The swirling vortex of nothingness slowed, sputtered, and then, with a horrifying crack, it solidified into a sphere of gleaming black volcanic glass. The creature was whole. It was real. It was vulnerable. Now, Naruto roared. Reina didn't hesitate. She had already taken aim with her left hand. The experimental pistol steady despite the agony in her other arm. She fired the single ontological round. The bullet, a shimmering needle of silver light, crossed the chamber in an instant and struck the obsidian head. There was no explosion. Instead, there was a single, pure, resonant tone, like a giant tuning fork being struck. A web of cracks, glowing with a brilliant white light, spread across the beast's entire body. It had been forced to become a single, solid object, and now the integrity of that object had been fundamentally compromised. With a final, silent cry, the steel demon shattered into a million pieces, which then dissolved into a fine, gray dust that was washed away by the swirling water on the floor. Silence descended on the chamber, broken only by the drip of water and Reina's own ragged breathing. The threat was gone, and she was now standing face to face with her secondary objective. She raised her pistol, the barrel aimed squarely at Naruto's chest. "The anomaly is neutralized," she said, her voice reverting to its cold, professional monotone. "By the authority of the SDRU, you are both under arrest for violation of the National Security Act regarding unsanctioned reality warping." Rikka stared at her, shocked. Naruto, however, simply looked at her, his expression one of weary disappointment. "Your loyalty to your orders is admirable, Staff Sergeant Kageyama, but your superiors have failed to provide you with the necessary context." "I have all the context I need," Reina growled, her finger tightening on the trigger. "You are unregistered, unsanctioned, and your very presence destabilizes reality. You are a threat, are we?" Naruto asked, and then he moved. He didn't move fast. He simply ceased to be where he was and came to be standing in front of her. The space between them was crossed without the need for travel. Before Reina's augmented reflexes could even register the change, his hand gently closed around her wrist. A jolt of energy, cold and absolute, shot up her arm. Every piece of technology in her suit went dead. Her optical sensors, her comms, her augmented muscles, even the trigger mechanism of her pistol, all of it was rendered inert. It wasn't a pulse or a shock. It was a command, spoken in a language her technology had no choice but to obey. "Cease." His other hand touched the barrel of her pistol. The advanced alloy of the gun twisted and flowed like clay, the barrel bending into a graceful, useless curve, pointing back at her own chest. He did it with no more effort than one would use to bend a piece of straw. He disarmed and neutralized her, the most advanced soldier in Japan, in less than a second, without a single act of violence. It was the most terrifyingly dominant display of power she had ever witnessed. She was a child with a toy, and he was a god who had just grown tired of the game. He released her wrist, and she stumbled back, her useless pistol clattering to the floor. The pain from her broken arm, no longer muted by the suit's painkillers, returned with a vengeance. "Your government is trying to put a leash on a hurricane," Naruto said, his voice soft but carrying an immense weight. "They see the null as a potential weapon, a new energy source to be harvested. They are not trying to stop it. They are trying to control it. They are fools, and they will get everyone you care about killed." He looked at her, his blue eyes seeming to see every battle she had fought, every scar she carried, every doubt she had ever buried under layers of duty and discipline. "You are a soldier. You believe in protecting your country. But what will you do when you realize your orders are leading it to its destruction?" He didn't wait for an answer. He placed a hand on a stunned Rikka's shoulder. "It is time to go." "Wait," Reina said, the word torn from her throat. What are you?" Naruto paused at the edge of the chamber and looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "I am the one who asks the questions you are not yet brave enough to consider." And with that, they dissolved back into the shadows, leaving Reina alone in the dripping, damaged tunnel. She was surrounded by the evidence of a battle that defied every rule she had ever known. Her suit was dead, her weapon was destroyed, her arm was broken, her mission was a complete and utter failure. But as she sank to her knees in the cold water, a single, terrifying thought burned through the pain and the humiliation. Naruto's warning. It had the ring of truth. And for the first time in her life, Staff Sergeant Reina Kageyama began to question her orders. A seed of doubt had been planted in the most ruthlessly pragmatic mind in Japan. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Symphony of Four. The ryokan, named Komorebi, or the Hermitage of Sun-Dappled Leaves, was an impossibility nestled in the Hakone Mountains. It did not appear on any map, and no road led to its gates. One moment, they were in the grimy, utilitarian sub-basement of the Argus Tower, the next. They stood on a path of perfectly placed stones, breathing in air that was crisp, cool, and carried the faint, clean scent of pine and the distant, mineral tang of volcanic springs. Autumn had laid a painter's palette across the landscape. The maple trees were a riot of crimson and gold, a stark, breathtaking contrast to the deep, unchanging green of the ancient cedars. A gentle stream, its water impossibly clear, chuckled its way over a bed of smooth, dark stones, its sound a quiet, constant meditation. The four women had been gathered by Naruto with a simple, untraceable message appearing on their respective devices, a set of coordinates and a time. Rikka had arrived with him, still processing the surreal combat in the tunnels. Kasumi had been brought by two of her silent priestesses to the edge of the shrine's sacred forest, where she simply walked into the mist and emerged here. Akane's corporate helicopter had deposited her at a designated clearing, a concession to her modern sensibilities, though she had spent the entire flight scanning for the source of the transmission with furious, fruitless intensity. Reina had been the last to arrive, alone. Grim figure in civilian clothes that still managed to look like a uniform, her previously shattered arm now perfectly healed without a scar, a parting gift from Naruto that had served as bow. A demonstration of his power and a deeply unsettling violation of her physical autonomy. They were a collection of contradictions. The hero, the oracle, the architect, and the weapon. Four pillars of disparate worlds, now assembled in a place of serene, timeless beauty, their purpose a council of war against an enemy that fed on reality itself. Naruto had arranged for the entire inn to be theirs exclusively. He greeted each of them with a calm, disarming grace that did little to soothe the crackling tension in the air. He led them through the main building, its polished cypress floors gleaming in the soft light from paper shoji screens, to their individual rooms. He then simply said, "Settle in. Find your center. We will speak before we convene," before disappearing into the Hermitage's labyrinthine corridors. It was a masterful stroke of strategy. By separating them, by giving them this quiet space, he was allowing the shock of their new reality to settle, letting the adrenaline of their respective encounters bleed away, to be replaced by thought. And he was giving himself the chance to approach each of them not as a group, but as the fiercely independent, powerful individuals they were. He found Rikka in the ryokan's central garden. She was kneeling on the wooden veranda, her back to him, watching a trio of massive, golden koi move with lazy, hypnotic grace in a pond as dark and reflective as polished obsidian. The air was cool, and the brilliant red leaves of a Japanese maple dipped low over the water, their reflection a perfect, shimmering twin. She had changed from her school uniform into the simple cotton yukata the inn provided, and the change seemed to strip away a layer of her youthful uncertainty, leaving behind the quiet stillness she had earned in the Chamber of Echoes. The world can be deceptively simple, can't it? Naruto's voice was soft, careful not to startle her. For them, he nodded towards the koi, the universe is this pond. Food appears, the water is clean, and the sun warms them. It is a complete and perfect existence. Rikka didn't turn. It must be nice, she said, her voice barely a whisper above the sound of a nearby shishi-adoshi. A bamboo fountain that clacked rhythmically as it filled and emptied. Not knowing how big and scary everything else is. Is that what you think? He moved to kneel beside her, his presence a familiar, comforting weight. Or do you think that, in their own way, they know everything they need to? They know the shadow of the heron is death. They know the tremor in the water means food. Their world is smaller, but they understand its rules completely. You are just beginning to learn the rules of yours. She was silent for a long moment, watching a single, perfect red leaf detach from its bran. And spiral down to the water's surface, creating a cascade of tiny, concentric rings that disturbed the koi. When I was in that concrete place, she began, her voice tight, with Sergeant Kageyama, I was so scared. It was different from the shrine. The shrine was about my own fear. But that monster, it was real. It could have just deleted us. And yet, it did not, Naruto said. You faced it. You faced a physical manifestation of the null, something that even the Miyamoto clan has not seen in centuries, and you gave it a name. You gave it rules. You defeated it. I only did it because you were there, she confessed. Finally turning to look at him. Her eyes were wide, her doubt a raw, open thing. And she, Reina, helped. All I did was Think really hard. Do not diminish your own power, Rikka, he said. His voice firm but not unkind. A smith with the finest steel and the hottest forge can still create a flawed blade if their will is not in the hammer strike. Your thoughts, your will, are the hammer. Akane's logic, Reina's tactics, my power, we are the forge. But you are the one who strikes the blow that gives the weapon its edge. He looked her in the eye, his blue gaze unwavering. I saw your face in that tunnel. You were afraid, yes. But you acted. You fought. The Rikka who first walked into my shop would have been paralyzed. Do you not see the difference? Do you not feel how much you have grown? His words were a balm. He wasn't just praising her. He was showing her the evidence of her own strength, laying it out like a map of her progress. He saw her, not as a scared teenager, but as the warrior she was becoming. The hollow space inside her, the one that had ached with worthlessness for so long, felt smaller. Warmer. I think I'm starting to, she admitted, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. It's just a lot to get used to. The universe is a lot to get used to, he agreed with a smile of his own. But you are not facing it alone. He reached out and, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his immense power, he brushed a stray leaf from her hair. The simple, fleeting touch sent a jolt of warmth through that had nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with the quiet, profound connection between them. It was the simple, perfect existence of the koi pond, a small, safe universe in the middle of a terrifyingly large one. And in that moment, she felt completely, utterly safe. Akane Shinjo had eschewed the yukata and the tranquil garden. She had claimed a small, private study on the second floor, a room with a single, massive window that overlooked a valley of fiery autumn trees. She had already commandeered the low lacquered table, covering it with a portable holographic projector that cast a swirling, complex model of the null's hexadecimal signature into the air. When Naruto slid the shoji screen open, she didn't look up. I've isolated the decay pattern, she said, her voice rapid fire. Her fingers dancing across a projected keyboard. It's not a virus. It's an anti-information algorithm. It doesn't corrupt data. It targets the metastructure, the very principles that allow data to have meaning. It's like a solvent that dissolves the idea of grammar, leaving all the words intact but nonsensical. The level of theoretical physics required to even conceive of this it's not human. I am aware, Naruto said, closing the door behind him and observing her work with a look of detached interest. Are you? She challenged, finally looking up at him. Her obsidian eyes were alight with a fierce, combative intelligence. I've been running simulations. Your arrival in my office did not register on any physical sensor. No thermal displacement, no gravitational shift, no electromagnetic pulse. You didn't travel through space. You simply overwrote your positional data. You were a walking, talking violation of the law of conservation of energy. So, let's dispense with the pleasantries. What are you? A von Neumann probe from a Type 5 civilization. A trans-dimensional biological construct. An emergent sentient manifestation of a fundamental universal constant. Give me a paradigm to work with. He met her intellectual barrage with an unshakable calm. You are trying to fit an ocean into a teacup, architect. Your questions are excellent, but your tools of measurement are insufficient. Then give me better tools. She shot back, standing up and circling the holographic model, her movements sharp and predatory. Don't speak in metaphors. Give me data. The energy Rikka generates. It has properties of both a particle and a wave, but it carries no charge and has no discernible mass. It's a conceptual force given tangible properties. How? What is the mechanism? What is the carrier particle? Is there a field associated with it? You believe that if you can name a thing, you can control it, Naruto observed. I believe that if I can understand a thing, I can defeat it, she corrected. Jabbing a finger at him. Or replicate it. You are the ultimate black box. A system that produces impossible results from unknown processes. I will not tolerate a black box in an equation this critical. So, talk. Quote. He smiled, a slow, knowing expression that she found both infuriating and intensely magnetic. Very well. Let us use a metaphor you might appreciate. Consider the concept of a shadow. A two-dimensional projection of a three-dimensional object. To a creature that exists only in 2 dimensions, the shadow is a real, tangible thing. But it cannot possibly comprehend the 3-dimensional object that casts it. It can measure the shadow's length, its shape, its movement. But it can never understand its depth, its substance. Any attempt to describe the 3D object using only 2D terminology would be, by definition, incomplete and paradoxical. He paused, letting the analogy sink in. Your science, your understanding of the universe, is a magnificent and intricate description of the 2nd dimension. You are asking me to describe myself in your terms. I cannot, not because I wish to be obtuse, but because the language lacks the necessary concepts. Akane was silent. Her mind, a quantum computer of flesh and blood, was racing, turning his analogy over and over. It was a perfect, elegant, and utterly maddening answer. He was not refusing to give her data. He was telling her that her entire system of measurement was fundamentally inadequate. He was treating her like a child, yet doing so in a way that acknowledged the full, vast scope of her intellect. It was a challenge. He was a mountain she could not climb, a code she could not crack, and for a woman who had conquered every intellectual challenge she had ever faced, it was the most compelling thing she had ever encountered. So, you're the 3D object, she said slowly, her eyes narrowed. And we're the Flatlanders living in the shadow. It is a crude approximation, Naruto allowed. But it is a starting point for your paradigm. Quote, fine, she conceded, a sharp, dangerous grin touching her lips. I'll accept your premise, for now, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life inventing 3D calculus. Her obsession had found its grand unifying theory. He was not just an anomaly to be studied, he was the key to an entirely new dimension of existence. And she would possess that key. The air grew cooler and mistier as Naruto followed a winding path to the ryokan's outer grounds, where a series of private, open-air onsen were built into the mountainside. He found Kasumi not in one of the hot springs, but standing before a small, moss-covered shrine dedicated to the mountain kami, a pair of stone fox statues guarding its entrance. The steam from the nearby springs coiled around her like ethereal serpents. She was dressed in her formal priestess attire, having refused the inn's yukata, a silent statement of her purpose here. When he approached, she turned and bowed, a gesture so deep and reverent it was almost a prostration. Azure Dragon, she said, her voice a soft, melodic chant. This ground weeps with joy at your presence. The kami of the mountain, the stream, the trees, they are all singing your name. They are singing the name of what I represent, Miyamoto Kasumi, he corrected gently. Order, stability, the pattern that underlies the chaos. I am merely a vessel for that principle. Kasumi looked up at him, her dark, serene eyes holding none of Akane's combative fire, but a depth of understanding that was, in its own way, just as intense. In our tradition, she said, her voice formal and poetic. The vessel that holds the sake is not the sake itself, but to touch the vessel is to be in the presence of the drink. To the mortal eye, the distinction is academic. I saw the truth of you at the shrine. I looked through the window of your form and glimpsed the sacred architecture of the cosmos. Her perception was unnervingly accurate. She did not see him with the eyes of a scientist or a soldier, but with a form of spiritual synesthesia, perceiving the fundamental mathematics of his being as a divine presence. That perception is a gift, Oracle. But it can also be a burden, Naruto cautioned. Do not mistake the messenger for the message itself. I am a tool, just as Rikka is. My purpose is to restore balance. A tool that can mend the world is, to us, a god, she countered softly. The distinction is meaningless. I have been meditating on the nature of the null. Our texts speak of Mara, the tempter, who seeks to convince the soul of its own meaninglessness. They speak of the Gaki, the hungry ghosts, who are forever empty and seek to consume. But this unraveling, it is more profound. It is not an attack on the soul, but on the sutra in which the soul's story is written. Is it not? Her grasp of the situation, filtered through the lens of her faith, was as astute as Akane's had been through the lens of science. That is an excellent way to describe it, Naruto agreed. It is a sentient stain of ink, spreading across the pages of reality. Then we shall be the scribes who protect the page, Kasumi declared, her voice ringing with a quiet, unshakable faith. She reached into her sleeve and produced a small, exquisitely folded ofuda, a paper talisman covered in elegant calligraphy. My clan is divided. The elders fear what they do not understand. They see your power as a typhoon that could just as easily destroy the village as it could drive away the enemy fleet. But I do not. I see the deep, quiet heart of the storm. The E of absolute calm from which all true order emanates. She held the ofuda out to him. This is a pact, not from my clan, but from me. It is a promise. My sight, my knowledge of the sacred arts, my life, they are sworn to your cause. You are the living embodiment of the divine I have sworn to serve. It is the greatest honor of my life to do so. Her devotion was absolute, a powerful, calming force. Where Akane saw him as a puzzle to be solved, Kasumi saw him as a truth to be served. It was a different kind of intensity, but no less profound. He accepted the talisman, a silent acknowledgement of her oath. In the mists of the holy mountain, surrounded by the quiet praise of the ancient spirits, a bond of pure, unwavering faith had been forged. He found Reina in the Ryokan's kendo dojo. It was a stark, beautiful space of polished dark wood floors, shoji screens, and nothing else. The air smelled of wood oil and clean, empty space. She was in the center of the room, on her knees, meticulously cleaning her gravity pulse pistol, which she had already managed to repair with tools Naruto suspected she had brought with her. She wore a simple, dark gray training GI, and her movements were precise, efficient, and utterly devoid of wasted energy. Her healed arm moved with perfect fluidity, but he could see the ghost of remembered pain in the tightness of her shoulders. He stood in the doorway, saying nothing, simply watching her. She did not acknowledge his presence for a full minute, continuing her work as if he wasn't there. It was a power play, a soldier's silent defiance. Finally, he snapped the weapon back together with a sharp, definitive click. I don't need a babysitter, she said without looking up, her voice flat and cold. I am not here to watch over you, Staff Sergeant, Naruto replied. His voice equally calm. I am here to ask a question. Save it, she retorted, finally looking at him. Her eyes were hard, chips of gray flint. I'm here because that thing you're fighting is a clear and present danger. My mission is to neutralize threats to Japan. For now, we have a common enemy. That's all this is, an alliance of convenience. Don't read anything else into it. I read nothing, he said, walking slowly into the center of the dojo, his bare feet silent on the polished floor. I only observe, and I observe a soldier of exceptional skill, courage, and discipline. A soldier who has dedicated her entire life to following orders. It's called being a professional, she said, a sarcastic edge to her voice. You should try it sometime. It's less messy than just showing up and breaking physics. And what happens when the orders are wrong? He asked, his voice cutting through her sarcasm like a razor. What happens when the map you have been given leads you off a cliff? Do you continue to march forward, out of a sense of professionalism? She flinched as if he had struck her. His words were a direct assault on the central pillar of her existence. My orders are based on the best intelligence the government has. Your government's intelligence tells them that a forest fire is a source of limitless energy that simply needs to be contained, he countered, his voice sharp and unyielding. They are building their house next to a volcano, believing they can harness the eruption. They sent you to fight the steel demon not to destroy it, but to test it. To gather data. Your life, Sergeant, was an acceptable loss in their experiment. Did you read that in your mission briefing? Her face went pale. The truth of his words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Of course, her mission had been data gathering. It was always data gathering. My life is always an acceptable loss, she said, her voice a low growl. It's part of the job. There is a difference between sacrificing your life for a cause and having it thrown away by men who are too arrogant and too blind to see the truth, Naruto said, his voice softening slightly. He stopped a few feet from her. I am not asking you to abandon your duty, or your country. I am asking you to decide what that duty truly is. Is it to a set of flawed orders? Or is it to the millions of people those orders will fail to protect? He was not trying to comfort her like he had Rikka. He was not challenging her intellectually like he had Akane, or meeting her on spiritual ground like he had Kasumi. He was challenging her core identity. He was speaking to her not as a soldier, but as a strategist, an equal, forcing her to confront the fatal flaw in her own operational logic. She stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. She was trembling, a mixture of rage and a terrifying, dawning uncertainty. He was not an enemy she could fight. He was an idea, a question that, once asked, could not be unasked. She had built her entire life on a foundation of rules, of order, of a clear chain of command. He was telling her the foundation was rotten. "And what makes you think you know better?" she finally whispered, her voice raw. "Because I am not trying to harness the storm," he said, his blue eyes holding hers. "I am the calm at its center. And I can see the path through it. The question is, Sergeant Kageyama, are you willing to walk it?" He turned and left her there, alone in the vast, empty dojo, her perfectly repaired weapon feeling suddenly useless in her hands. He had not offered her comfort or answers. He had offered her a choice, a responsibility. And for a woman who had spent her life following orders, the weight of that choice was the heaviest burden she had ever been asked to carry. For the first time, she began to respect him. Not for his power, but for his brutal, unwavering honesty. He had looked at the soldier and spoken to the woman within, and that was a foe she had no idea how to fight. The five of them gathered in the ryokan's largest private dining room as twilight settled over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of violet and indigo. They knelt on silk cushions around a low, dark wood table. A single, elegant ikebana flower arrangement stood in the center. The only light came from paper lanterns that cast a soft, warm glow on their faces. The air was thick with unspoken thoughts. Rikka sat beside Naruto, her quiet confidence a stark contrast to her earlier fear. Akane was across from them, her fingers steepled, her sharp eyes darting between the others, analyzing, assessing. Kasumi sat with perfect, serene posture, a calming presence that was nonetheless charged with devotional intensity. And Reina sat slightly apart, her back ramrod straight, a fortress of disciplined silence. Her inner turmoil carefully hidden behind a mask of cold professionalism. Four powerful women from four different worlds. A hero finding her strength, an architect discovering a new dimension. An oracle witnessing her god, and a soldier questioning her duty. Their individual reasons for being there were complex, born of awe, intellect, faith, and a grudging, newfound respect. Rivalries simmered just beneath the surface, Akane's intellectual possessiveness clashing with Kasumi's spiritual reverence, with Rikka caught between them as the original and most emotionally connected. Naruto sat at the head of the table, the calm, unmoving center of the nascent storm. He looked at each of them in turn, acknowledging the private battles fought and the silent pacts made that day. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice filling the quiet room. "The enemy we face is absolute. Our response must be the same. The alliance we forge in this room will be the shield that protects the world." The first council of war was about to begin, and the fate of reality rested on the symphony, or the cacophony, that these four extraordinary women would create together. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Star-Fallen Refugee. The Council of War in the tranquil ryokan had barely concluded, a fragile intense consensus reached, when the world's serene mask was ripped away. Kasumi, in the middle of a soft-spoken commentary on the spiritual implications of the null's signature, gasped. The small, woven omamori charm she had given Rikka, which sat on the low table between them, suddenly flared with a violent, actinic light. It wasn't the warm, gentle pulse it had exhibited before. This was a frantic, desperate beacon, its light so intense it cast sharp, dancing shadows on the paper walls. Simultaneously, a high-pitched alarm, a sound of pure digital panic, shrieked from Akane's personal terminal. She was on her feet in an instant, a holographic display of the solar sigh. Stem bursting into existence above the table, replacing the soft lamplight with its cold, blue glow. A massive, angry red icon was screaming towards the Earth-Moon system. "What is that? An asteroid?" Reina demanded, her hand instinctively moving to the pistol she had concealed within her GI. "No," Akane's voice was tight with a mixture of horror and intellectual ecstasy. "An asteroid is a thing. It has mass. It reflects light. It exists. That," she pointed a trembling finger at the icon, "is a hole. A void. My deep space Argus net sensors are registering a complete absence of everything moving this way at 0.99 C. No data, no radiation, no quantum foam, just a moving patch of absolute nothing." It's not an object, it's a wound in the fabric of space-time. Kasumi's charm is reacting to its approach, Naruto stated, his calm voice cutting through the rising alarm. It is a null event of unprecedented scale. He looked at Akane. Your sensors are the only ones on the planet that can see this. My proprietary network, yes. But to get a precise trajectory, to analyze the nature of the wound itself, I need higher resolution telemetry. I need a quantum entangled comms array and a deep space observatory. She trailed off, her mind processing options at impossible speed. Tanegashima, the JAXA Space Center. It's the only facility in this hemisphere with the hardware. It's also a maximum security military-grade installation, Reina interjected, her pragmatic mind already cataloging the obstacles. You can't just walk in. Naruto met her gaze. We will not be walking. He rose from his cushion. And the world dissolved. The scent of pine and incense was violently replaced by the smell of conditioned air, floor wax, and the faint, metallic tang of high-grade electronics. They materialized not outside the facility, but within the very heart of it, a vast, cavernous mission control center. A multi-story screen, currently displaying a serene image of the Earth from orbit, dominated one wall. Dozens of workstations were arranged in tiered rows, all of them currently empty, the facility on its minimal nighttime staff. The only sound was the low, omnipresent hum of immense computational power. A pair of armed guards near the main entrance saw them appear. Their eyes widened in shock, their shouts of alarm dying in their throats as they fumbled for their radios. Reina, Naruto said, his voice calm. Reina didn't need to be told twice. She moved with the fluid, brutal efficiency of a predator. Before the guards could raise their rifles, she had closed the distance. A precise nerve strike to the neck dropped the first man in a silent, unconscious heap. The second guard turned, and Reina disarmed him with a fluid wrist lock, spun him around, and read him unconscious with a sharp blow to the base of the skull. The entire engagement took less than 3 seconds. It was silent, professional, and utterly definitive. She dragged the bodies behind a server rack, out of sight. Akane was already moving towards the director's console, a throne-like station at the center of the room. I need a terminal, and a distraction. They'll have noticed the internal security camera blackout by now. Quote, I will be the distraction, Reina said, cracking her knuckles. Just get me the data. As if on cue, klaxons began to blare, and red lights flashed across the ceiling. Heavy security doors began to slide shut, sealing the control room. Akane jacked a cable from her personal device directly into the JAXA mainframe, her fingers already a blur across her projected keyboard. Their black ice is military grade. Cute, she muttered, a savage grin on her face. Daedalus, deploy the Minotaur protocol. I want a labyrinth of false positives and recursive logic traps. Give their security AI a migraine. Quote, while Akane waged war in cyberspace, Reina stood by the main door, a grim, immovable object. A squad of 6 heavily armed security personnel arrived, trying to pry the doors open. Reina waited until the door was open just wide enough, then kicked it with the force of an industrial piston, the metal groaning as it slammed into the men, sending them sprawling. She flowed through the opening. A whirlwind of precise, disabling blows, and within 30 seconds, another squad was unconscious in the corridor. Meanwhile, Rikka and Kasumi stood near Naruto, feeling profoundly out of place in this world of sterile technology and brutal efficiency. Kasumi had her eyes closed, her hands pressed together in prayer, her spiritual senses overwhelmed by the sheer soullessness of the place. Rikka watched Reina with a mixture of fear and awe, a stark reminder that the battle against the null was not always a metaphysical one. Got it, Akane yelled, a triumphant note in her voice. The main screen flickered, the serene Earth replaced by a storm of complex telemetry and trajectory plots. The red icon of the void was clearer now, its path undeniable. It's not aimed at Earth. The destination is Lagrange point 1. No, it's passing through it. Trajectory is a direct intercept with the moon. Impact zone. The Sea of Tranquility. It is not an impact, Naruto said, his eyes fixed on the screen. It is a disembarkation. That is not an attack. It is a doorway. He looked at the 4 women, his expression more serious than they had ever seen it. We must go there. We must meet what comes through. Before anyone could object, before even Akane could question the logic of such a move, Naruto placed a hand on her shoulder. The oppressive gravity and humming air of the JAXA control room vanished, replaced by nothing, absolute silence, a blackness more profound and complete than any night sky, a cold that was not a temperature but a complete absence of heat. Rikka felt her breath catch in her chest, a useless, panicked reflex in the airless void. A shimmering, translucent bubble of golden energy enveloped the five of them, a pocket of breathable atmos. Fear and tolerable pressure in the hostile vacuum of space. They were standing on the surface of the moon. The sight was so overwhelming, so utterly reality-shattering, that for a moment, all thought ceased. The lunar surface was a landscape of stark, brutal beauty, a monochrome desert of gray dust and sharp-edged rock under a sky of perfect, star-dusted black. There was no haze, no wind, no sound. The stars did not twinkle. They were hard, brilliant diamonds, cold and terrifyingly distant. And hanging in that impossible black sky was Earth, a breathtaking, swirling marble of blue, white, and green. It was so beautiful, so vibrant and alive in the dead silence of space, that it was physically painful to look at. Incredible, Akane breathed, her scientific mind momentarily silenced by pure, unadulterated awe. The clarity, the raw, unfiltered physics of it all. Reina's reaction was tactical. Her gaze swept the horizon, assessing threat vectors that didn't exist, her combat-honed instincts useless in this silent, empty battlefield. Kasumi simply stared at the earth, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the spiritual significance of seeing the home of all life, of all kami, as a fragile, singular entity. Rikka felt a profound agoraphobia, a terror of the infinite, crushing emptiness that surrounded their tiny, fragile bubble of life. This way, Naruto's voice grounded them. He led them over a low rise, their boots making no sound in the fine, gray regolith. They came to the edge of a crater, but it was unlike any other on the moon's scarred face. It was a perfect, concave bowl, several hundred meters across, and it was not made of rock or dust. Its surface was a smooth, shimmering, crystalline material that seemed to have partially melted and then refused the surrounding regolith. It glowed with a faint, internal, multicolored light, and a low, subsonic hum vibrated through the soles of their boots, the only sound on the entire world. And in the center of the crystalline dish sat the ship. It was not a ship of metal and rivets. It was a construct of pure geometry and light, a four-dimensional tesseract struggling to exist in a three-dimensional space. It was a cube made of smaller, interconnected cubes, its surfaces shimmering with the light of trapped nebulae, its angles and corners constantly folding in and out of existence. It was a physical paradox, an object that was beautiful and deeply, fundamentally wrong. As they watched, one of the tesseract's surfaces dissolved, opening a portal that was not a door, but a window into a space filled with swirling, golden light. A figure emerged, floating down to the crystalline floor. It was a being of pure energy, its form vaguely humanoid but constantly shifting, composed of flowing ribbons of silver and blue light. It had no face, only a brighter concentration of light where a head would be. It radiated an aura of immense age and profound, soul-crushing sadness. This was Lyra, the Star Weaver. Then, she spoke. Her voice was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a wave of pure information that washed over their minds, a flood of synesthetic data that their brains struggled to translate. Her greeting was a concept that felt like the chiming of crystal bells, the color sapphire blue, and the sensation of cool, flowing water. It was a feeling of arrival and inquiry. Akane grunted, her hand flying to her temple. It's a direct conceptual data stream. No encryption, no protocol, pure telepathic broadcast. She was trying to analyze it, to frame it in a way she could understand. Kasumi's eyes were wide with wonder. It is the Kodadama, she whispered. The pure language of creation. The spirit words. Rikka, to her surprise, understood it most clearly. The being's voice was similar to the way she had to think to use her own power, a language of pure concept. The being, Lyra, focused on them, and her next thought was a wave of overwhelming emotion and imagery. The concept was refugee, and with it came a memory, a vision projected directly into their minds, a memory of her world. They saw cities of spun light and woven crystal, inhabited by beings like her. The Why saw ships that sailed on stellar winds between planets with rings of singing dust? It was a civilization of artists and poets, a reality where science and beauty were the same thing. It was a paradise. Then, the vision soured. They felt Lyra's terror. They saw the silent null arrive in her universe. It was not a fleet of ships or a monster. It was a patch of sky where the stars went out. A patch of wrongness that grew. They watched as a planet, a vibrant world of music and light, simply faded. Its colors washed out, its sounds muted, its form simplified, and then it was gone, leaving nothing behind. Not even an afterimage, just a smooth, featureless blankness in the fabric of space. The vision accelerated. They watched in horror as star systems, nebulae, entire galaxies were unwritten, their stories erased. Their light extinguished, their memory consumed. Lyra's people fought, not with weapons, but with creation. They sang songs of reality, they built sculptures of fundamental laws, trying to reinforce their existence against the creeping, absolute negation. But the null was too vast, too hungry. It was a battle between a library and a fire, and the fire was winning. The vision ended with Lyra, the sole survivor, fleeing in her tesseract ship, a seed bank of her people's memories and art, tearing a desperate, final fold through the skin of reality as her entire universe behind her was reduced to a single, silent, blank page. The raw, undiluted grief and loss that accompanied the vision was a physical force. It brought them all to their knees. Reyna, the hardened soldier, who hadn't shed a tear since she was a child, felt a cold track run down her cheek. The scale of it, the cosmic genocide, it was too vast to comprehend. Their fight for Tokyo, for Earth, suddenly seemed so small. So terrifyingly insignificant. It is not a force, Lyra's thought voice echoed in their minds, a concept that tasted of ash and felt like the crushing pressure of a deep ocean. It is a mind. It is intelligent. It learned as it consumed. It is the great silence. The final editor. And now, it has tasted the flavor of your story. It knows you exist. It will come. The five of them were frozen, paralyzed by the sheer, existential horror of the revelation. This was not a monster. This was a rival god, a cosmic intelligence whose sole purpose was to bring the story of the universe to a close. It was then that Lyra's attention, which had been spread among them, focused with laser-like intensity on one individual. Naruto. The projection she sent to him was private, but the others felt the aftershock of it, a wave of pure, unadulterated awe so powerful it made the lunar dust tremble. Akane, her mind still linked to the data stream, was able to catch fragments of the concepts Lyra was projecting at him. Anchor of causality, the unmoved, the first pattern. To her astonishment, Lyra was not seeing Naruto as a powerful being. She was seeing him as a peer to the silent null. An equal and opposite force. The cosmic principle of order to the null's principle of entropy. A fundamental constant of the universe, wearing the shape of a man. Akane's 3D object theory was not just right, it was a profound understatement. Lyra's form flowed forward, bowing before Naruto in a gesture of ultimate respect between cosmic powers. You are here, her thought voice was a symphony of relief and renewed, fragile hope. The story of this universe is not yet unguarded. My ship is failing. My energy is spent. What remains of my people, of my reality, I offer to you. My knowledge is yours. My life is yours. Use me to stop the silence. Let my story's end have this one, final meaning. Naruto stepped forward, out of the protective bubble, and stood in the vacuum, unaffected. He reached out and placed his hand on the brightest point of Lyra's light form. A wave of calm, golden energy flowed from him into her, stabilizing her flickering form. He did not speak aloud, but his response echoed in all of their minds. A concept of profound, unshakable resolve that felt like the strength of mountains and the certainty of the dawn. Your people will not be forgotten. Your story will not end as a tragedy. It will be the prologue to our victory. Standing on the silent, dead surface of the moon, under the beautiful, fragile gaze of their distant home, the five of them looked at each other. They were no longer just a team. They were the last, desperate line of defense in a war for the continued existence of everything. The stakes had just been raised to infinity. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Price of a Miracle. The hourglass was a sanctuary of silence suspended between moments. Lyra, the star-fallen refugee, hovered in the center of the shop, her form a gentle, flowing construct of silver light. She was projecting a silent, conceptual map of her lost universe into the air, a heartbreakingly beautiful web of extinct galaxies and forgotten star lanes. Akane stood transfixed, her personal AI, Daedalus, working furiously to translate the pure concepts into quantifiable data, her mind alight with the terrifying, exhilarating scope of a whole new cosmology. Kasumi knelt on a tatami mat, her eyes closed, her spiritual senses attuned to the profound, cosmic grief that emanated from their visitor. Reina stood with her back to a bookshelf, arms crossed, her expression a mask of grim pragmatism as she tried to process the scale of their enemy. Rikka, sitting beside Naruto at his petrified wood counter, felt the weight of it all settle in her bones. Their fight was no longer for a cafe or a city. It was a defense of the last lighted page in a book the size of a universe. It was into this somber, high-stakes briefing that the chaos intruded. The first warning was spiritual. The Omamori charm, resting on the counter beside a cup of cooling tea, did not flare. Instead, it shuddered, its woven threads tightening as if seized by a sudden, agonizing cramp. The warm, protective pulse it emitted guttered like a dying candle flame, and Kasumi gasped, her hands flying to her chest as if feeling a sympathetic pain. The second warning was technological, a split second later. A discordant screech of digital feedback erupted from Akane's terminal. It was not the clean alarm of a detected threat, but a messy, agonized sound, like a machine being tortured. "What is that?" Reina's voice was sharp, cutting through the stunned silence. "It's wrong," Akane breathed, her eyes wide as she stared at the stream of corrupted data scrolling across her holographic display. "It's not the clean signature of an erasure. It's not a null point. It's garbage data, a feedback loop, a paradox." She gestured to the charm. "Your magic trinket feels it too, doesn't it, Miko-san? This isn't a deletion. This is a corruption." Kasumi's face was pale, her brow beaded with sweat. "The great river, the flow of time, it is not being dammed. It is being churned, fouled. Something is stirring the waters into a poisoned whirlpool." Location. Naruto's voice was calm, but it held a new, hard edge. Akane's fingers flew, tracing the source of the paradoxical signal. A map of the Kanto region appeared, and a single point in Yokohama began to flash a sickly, flickering yellow. "Yokohama General Hospital," she announced, her voice grim. "Largest medical facility in the prefecture. Over 1,000 patients, 400 staff. Communications are down. Every single live camera feed is." She paused, her analytical mind struggling to describe the input. "They're looping, fragmenting. Some are running at 1,000 times normal speed. Others are frozen on a single, corrupted frame. Life signs from the building's internal network are fluctuating. A patient is registering as 3 years old 1 second, and 93 the next. A temporal fracture," Naruto stated, his eyes narrowing. "The null is no longer content to simply erase. It is experimenting. It is weaponizing time itself." "Liar." A's form pulsed with a wave of cold dread, a concept that felt like watching a past horror repeat itself. Less than this is a known tactic, greater than her thought voice echoed in their minds, carrying the weight of 1 billion lost souls. Less than a late-stage weapon. It does not erase a place. It unmoors it from the flow of causality. It turns it into a cancerous knot in the timeline, an island of eternal, repeating torment. It is an act of cosmic cruelty. A way to study the decay of a story before consuming it. "Greater than. Can we fix it?" Rikka asked, her voice small. "We are about to find out," Naruto said. He stood, and the comfortable, dusty reality of the hourglass was ripped away. They materialized on the rooftop of a skyscraper a block away from Yokohama General. The late afternoon sun was warm and golden, but the hospital itself was shrouded in a different kind of light. A sickly, jaundiced, yellow twilight clung to the building like a shroud, a localized weather system of wrongness. The air around them was clear, but the air above the hospital seemed to shimmer and warp, distorting the sky behind it. From this distance, the building appeared normal, but Akane's sensors and Kasumi's spiritual senses were screaming. It was a place that was profoundly, fundamentally out of sync. "Let's move," Reina commanded, already taking charge. The descent to the street was a blur of controlled motion, and soon they were Standing before the main entrance of the hospital, a set of automated glass doors that were currently sliding open, then shut, then open again in a frantic, spastic rhythm. The moment they stepped through the doors, reality buckled. The pristine, white-walled lobby was a stage for a surreal and terrifying play. The air was thick with the smells of antiseptic, ozone, and something else, something that smelled like old, wet dust. The scent of time itself decaying. A nurse pushing a medical cart slid silently across the floor, moving forward 5 feet before instantly reversing and repeating the motion. A human ghost trapped in a corrupted video file. The sound was a nightmare collage. A baby's cry from a distant ward was caught in a half-second loop, creating a high-pitched, rhythmic stuttering that drilled into the skull. The gentle, automated voice from the PA system announcing visiting hours was stretched and distorted, the words slowed to a demonic, guttural crawl. They moved deeper inside, and the chaos intensified. They passed a waiting room where a dropped tray of food, a bowl of rice, a piece of fish, a cup of tea, was falling to the floor over and over again. It never hit the ground. It would reach a certain point, then snap back to the height from which it was dropped, its arc a perfect, unending loop of imminent disaster. The family waiting nearby was frozen, their expressions of shock and surprise locked on their faces. In a room with a large glass window, they witnessed the true horror. An elderly man lay in a bed, and as they watched, his form flickered. The wrinkles on his face smoothed. His white hair darkened, and he became a middle-aged man, then a young man, then a teenager, a child, an infant, before dissolving into a flash of light. A second later, the old man reappeared in the bed, his chest heaving with a silent, looping gasp, the entire cycle of his life and unlife repeating every 30 seconds. "My God," Akane whispered, her scientific detachment shattered by the sheer, visceral horror. "It's worse than I thought. The individual quantum states of every particle in this building are desynchronized from the universal timeline. These souls are being shredded," Kasumi said, her face a mask of pain. She was seeing the spiritual echoes of the temporal chaos, the luminous threads of each person's life force being frayed and tangled. If this continues, their spirits will unravel completely. It was Reina who brought them back to the brutal, tactical reality. "This entire building is a lost cause," she stated, her voice as hard as granite. "The temporal contagion could spread. One person walks out of that door, and they might carry the effect with them. The only logical move is to quarantine. Seal the perimeter. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. We write off everyone inside to save the city. It's a hard choice, but it's the only one." "That is not a choice, that is an execution," Akane shot back, whirling on her. "There are 1,000 innocent people in here. There has to be a source. A focal point. A device or an entity emitting a chaotic chronoton field. If I can triangulate its position, I can build a counter-frequency. I can recalibrate the local space-time. I just need time." The irony of her own words seemed lost on her in her scientific fury. "You don't have time," Reina countered, stepping into her face. "While you're playing with your theories, this contagion could be spreading through the water pipes. The power grid. We cut the limb to save the body. It's tactical triage, pure and simple. A spirit cannot be recalibrated with a frequency." Kasumi interjected, her voice rising with a passion they had never heard from her before. "This is a spiritual wound, inflicted on the fabric of causality itself. Your machines are useless here, architect, and your brutal logic, sergeant, ignores the sanctity of the lives trapped within. We must find the heart of the wound and perform a healing, a purification." The three women stood in a triangle in the middle of a hallway where the lights flickered between a sterile, fluorescent glare and the dim, yellowed light of decades past, their ideologies clashing as fiercely as the temporal chaos around them. It was Naruto who silenced them. He did not raise his voice. He simply spoke, and his words carried a weight that cut through their argument. "You are all correct," he said. And the three of them turned to look at him, stunned. "And you are all wrong." He looked at Reina. "Your logic is sound, Sergeant, but it is incomplete. The null does not follow the rules of a biological contagion. It is a conceptual attack. Sealing the building will not stop it if it decides to spread." He turned to Akane. "Your science is brilliant, architect, but it is a science of a stable universe. You are trying to repair a clock with a hammer and chisel while the very concept of time is being unwritten. There is no focal point to attack, no machine to disable. The wound is everywhere at once. He then faced Kasumi. And you were right, Oracle. This is a spiritual wound. But its scale is beyond any purification ritual your order has ever conceived. You cannot heal a severed artery with a prayer. He let the weight of their respective failures sink in. He had not taken a side. He had shown each of them the hard limits of their own worldview. Lyra was right, he continued. His voice low and serious. This is a knot in the timeline. A cancerous tangle of 1,000 different threads of reality, all pulling against each other. It cannot be cut, for that WOULD simply sever these people from reality entirely. It cannot be shielded. It must be untangled. The entire timeline of this building, of every person and object within it, must be grasped at once and pulled straight. It must be re-anchored to the one, true, linear flow of time. Rikka, who had been listening in horrified silence, finally understood. Her power was to be an anchor. This was a store, that required the greatest anchor of all. I can do it, she said, her voice quiet but firm. That's my job, isn't it? To be the anchor. The other three women stared at her. Rikka, no, Akane said, her voice losing its sharp edge. Replaced by genuine alarm. The energy calculations for that. To impose a single, coherent timeline on a chaotic system of this magnitude, the feedback would be catastrophic. She is right, Kasumi added. Her face etched with worry. To grasp the timeline of 1,000 souls, you would have to offer your own soul as the weight, as the anchor. The strain, it would drain your spirit. Perhaps even extinguish it. Naruto looked at Rikka, his blue eyes filled with a profound, terrible sadness. He was not going to command her. He was not going to forbid it. He was going to give her the truth. They are correct, Rikka. This is not like anchoring a single concept or memory. It is like holding 1,000 fraying, snapping live wires at once. To become the anchor for this building, you would have to pour your own life force, your own personal timeline, into the effort. You would be betting your very existence against the chaos. It would age you. It could break your mind. It could even unravel you completely, just like the people you are trying to save. I can help you bear the strain. We all can. But the connection, the ultimate price, it must be paid by you. The choice hung in the air, heavier than any silence they had ever known. The looping, distorted sounds of the hospital were the ticking clock of 1,000 lives. Reina, the pragmatic soldier who had just argued for sacrificing them all, was the one who spoke first, her voice a low, choked whisper. No, the price is too high. We don't sacrifice one of our own. We find another way. In that moment, her pragmatic logic had been broken by an unfamiliar, unwelcome emotion, loyalty. But just as she spoke, a terrifying, grinding roar echoed from the west wing of the hospital. They looked down the long corridor and watched in horror as the physical structure of the building began to accelerate through time. The white walls yellowed, cracked, and crumbled. Pipes burst from the ceiling, rusted over, and turned to dust. The process of decades, of centuries, unfolded in the space of a few heartbeats. The wing was decaying into ruin before their eyes, and the people inside with it. There was no more time for debate. There was no other way. Rikka looked at the decaying hallway, at the faces of her friends, her team, their arguments silenced by the sheer, overwhelming horror. She thought of the man in the bed, living and dying over and over. She thought of the falling tray of food, a tiny, perfect metaphor for their situation, a disaster that was always about to happen, forever. She thought of her purpose. An anchor in the storm. I'll do it, she said, and her voice did not tremble. It was the voice of a hero who had looked at an impossible price and decided it was worth paying. Her decision galvanized them. The arguments were over. The team was united in her choice. All right, Akane said, her voice all business, her analytical mind now focused on a new problem, maximizing Rikka's chances. The building's emergency power grid has its own independent temporal signature. If I can reroute it, I can create a low-level electromagnetic field to help stabilize the environment. It won't fix things, but it might reduce the strain on you by a few percentage points. The temporal distortions are beginning to manifest physically, Reina announced, pointing to a nearby doorway where The air was shimmering and a gurney was being repeatedly crushed and uncrushed by an invisible force. I'll secure the perimeter. I'll keep the immediate area clear. You will not be disturbed. I'll perform the rite of spiritual shielding, Kasumi declared, kneeling and drawing a series of intricate kanji in the air with her fingers, which glowed with a soft, white light. I will weave a ward around your soul, Rika-san. It may not be much against such a storm, but it will help you hold on to who you are. Lyra's form flowed around them, a river of starlight. Less than the silence creates feedback. A psychic shriek. I will build a cocoon of the memories of my people. A wall of silence against the silence. It will shield your mind. Greater than. They formed a protective circle in the center of the chaotic lobby. Akane jacked into a wall panel. Her hands a blur. Reina stood guard, her pistol drawn, her eyes scanning for threats. Kasumi began a low, melodic chant. Lyra wove a shimmering dome of silver light over them. Rika stood in the center of it all and looked at Naruto. He gave her a single, slow nod, his expression a mixture of profound pride and deep sorrow. He was the only one who truly understood the nature of the sacrifice she was about to make. He stepped behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders. He would be the final conduit, the lens that would focus all their combined power, all their hope, into her. Do it, Rika, he said softly. Be the anchor. She closed her eyes and reached out, not with her hands, but with her will. She did not focus on a single object. She expanded her consciousness, pushing it outwards, through the floors, through the walls, through every single room of the stricken hospital. She felt the thousand tangled timelines, the screaming chaos of moments torn from their proper sequence. She took hold of all of them at once. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It was the feeling of her mind, her soul, her very existence being torn in 1,000 different directions. The feedback was a psychic scream that would have shattered her sanity, but Lyra's shield of silence held. The spiritual strain threatened to tear her soul apart, but Kasumi's ward was a thin, strong thread. Holding it together, Akane's field stabilized the environment just enough to keep the physical world from dissolving around her. Reina's gunshots echoed from down the hall as she dealt with a physical anomaly. But the core of the burden was hers alone. She felt her own life force, her own personal history and future, being siphoned out of her, pouring into the chaotic vortex to act as the weight. The pattern, the anchor. She felt the years of her life being burned away like fuel. She grit her teeth and pulled. With a scream that was both silent and deafening, she pulled. She pulled the tangled threads of time taut, forcing them back into a single, straight, unyielding line. A wave of pure, brilliant golden light, the color of a perfect sunrise, erupted from her. It was not a destructive blast, but a wave of absolute, conceptual order. It washed through the entire hospital in an instant. The looping nurse completed her journey and walked normally down the hall. The dropped tray of food finally clattered to the floor. The baby's cry resolved into a normal, healthy wail. In the private room, the elderly man sat up in bed, breathing deeply, his life his own again. The demonic voice on the PA system became calm and gentle. The sickly yellow twilight vanished, replaced by the clean, white light of the hospital's fluorescent bulbs. The sounds, the sights, the very air of the hospital snapped back into their proper, mundane sequence. The knot had been untangled. The miracle had been performed. In the center of the lobby, Rikka Takarada collapsed. The team rushed to her side. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow, her face as pale as pristine snow. And there, stark and undeniable against the dark strands of her hair, running from her right temple back, was a single, thick streak of pure, brilliant white. It was a scar on her timeline, a permanent, physical testament to the years of her life she had just sacrificed. They had won, but as they looked down at their fallen hero, the victory felt cold, and the price felt impossibly high. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. Whispers of Betrayal. The debriefing room was a cube of sterile white, a causti. Cali sealed and shielded from all forms of electronic surveillance. It smelled of nothing. It was a place designed to bleach the truth, to render chaotic, visceral experiences into clean, manageable lines of text on a report. For Staff Sergeant Reina Kageyama, it felt like a tomb. Across a polished steel table, Commander Kato Ishida reviewed her report on a translucent data slate. He was a man who seemed to have been carved from ice. His features sharp, his eyes a flat, emotionless gray, his posture so rigid it was a statement of intent. He was not a field soldier, he was a bureaucrat of the highest, most dangerous order. A man who waged wars with signatures and redacted files. Spontaneous conceptual stabilization, Ishida read aloud, his voice as sterile as the room. The Type 3 manifestation, after a period of extreme temporal and physical instability, underwent a cascading systemic failure and neutralized itself. You report your equipment was rendered inoperable by a localized chronoton pulse. But you escaped without significant injury. He looked up, his gray eyes pinning Reina in place. Your report is concise. The situation was chaotic, Commander, Reina replied, her voice a perfect, clipped monotone. The lie felt like swallowing ground glass. Every word was a betrayal of what had actually happened, a betrayal of the girl who had sacrificed a piece of her life to save 1,000 others. My sensor logs were corrupted. The report reflects the only verifiable data. Of course, Ishida said, a thin, bloodless smile touching his lips. It did not reach his eyes. But we have other data. Our long-range sensors detected a unique energy signature at the moment of the stabilization. A tremendous burst of what our R&D department is tentatively calling ontological force. It left a residue, a distinct, biological pattern woven into the very fabric of the area. He leaned forward, the icy mask of professionalism cracking just enough to reveal the predator beneath. It's the same signature we detected at the Argus Tower incident. The one you failed to secure. The unspoken accusation hung in the air between them. Reina's face remained a blank slate, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Naruto's warning echoed in her mind. Your superiors have failed to provide you with the necessary context. The unidentified reality warpers were not present at the Yokohama site, sir, she lied again. The words a precise, military formation. Perhaps, Ishida conceded, leaning back. But their energy was a weapon, perhaps, a device they deployed remotely. This force, it does not destroy. It imposes. It rewrites the rules. We need to understand it. We need to acquire it. Your primary objective remains the capture of these URWs. But a new directive has been added. Any technology, any biological samples, any data related to this ontological force, is now priority alpha. Do you understand, Staff Sergeant? Crystal, sir, Reina said, her voice betraying none of the cold dread coiling in her gut. They are not trying to stop it. They are trying to harvest it. Naruto's words were no longer a warning. They were a mission brief. She was dismissed with a curt nod. The steel door hissing shut behind her, sealing her back into the cold, humming corridors of the SDRU headquarters, a subterranean fortress of concrete and steel located deep beneath the National Diet Building. It was a place she had once called home, the only home she had ever really known. Now, every shadow felt like an accusation, every humming server a whispered secret. For the rest of the day, she went through the motions. She ran diagnostics on her repaired suit, spent 2 hours in a combat simulation, and filed 3 supplementary reports. She was the perfect soldier, a model of discipline. But beneath the surface, a different plan was taking shape, a cold, hard strategy born of a single, terrifying question: what if he was right? That night, she did not go to her Spartan barracks. Instead, she made her way to the heart of the fortress, the archives. A TIER-7 secure data vault where every piece of SDRU intelligence, every mission report, every research project, was stored on isolated, physically air-gapped quantum servers. It was the brain of the organization. And she was going to perform surgery on it. The physical security was a nightmare she herself had helped design. Pressure plates, laser grids, biometric scanners keyed to pulse, body temperature, and the unique electrical signature of a person's nervous system. But she knew the flaws. She knew the maintenance cycles. She knew the blind spots in the camera coverage that existed for a mere 1.7 seconds every 43 minutes. Moving through the darkened corridors, she was a ghost, her steps silent, her movements AF. Fluid dance with the very systems meant to stop her. She reached the vault's outer chamber. The final barrier was a sealed adamantium door and a biometric console that required a palm print, a retinal scan, and a real-time voice print from an active duty commander. A barrier she could not pass. But she wasn't going through the door. She was going through the floor. She pried open a maintenance panel, revealing a tangle of coolant pipes and power conduits. She slipped inside, the space claustrophobically tight, and began the arduous process of crawling through the guts of the facility. She was not just a soldier, she was an engineer. She knew this building's anatomy. After 20 minutes of tense, silent travel, she was directly beneath the server room. The final obstacle was the digital one. The vault's internal network was a black site, completely isolated. Even if she could physically tap into it, the SDRU's security AI, codenamed Argus, a grimly ironic choice, she now realized, would detect and obliterate any unauthorized connection within a nanosecond. She was a master of physical infiltration, but she was an amateur in the world of cyberspace. She needed a different kind of weapon. She needed a monster. She found a shielded terminal in the maintenance tunnel, one used for diagnostics. It had a single, untraceable quantum entanglement comms channel for off-site emergencies. A back door. She activated her personal comms device, a piece of tech far more advanced than her standard issue gear, and sent a single, encrypted data burst. It contained no text, no voice. Just a complex mathematical problem that had no solution, followed by a set of geographic coordinates. It was a challenge, a calling card. She could only hope the monster was listening. Akane Shinjo was bored. After the cosmic revelations on the moon, returning to the mundane world of corporate espionage and hostile takeovers felt like being a theoretical physicist forced to teach basic arithmetic. She sat in her penthouse, surrounded by the bleeding-edge technology that had once been her entire world, and felt nothing but a profound sense of anticlimax. Then, she received the message. It was a beautiful, elegant piece of work. It bypassed every one of her company's firewalls, filtered through Daedalus's defenses, and appeared directly on her private server. It was a cryptographic prime number problem wrapped in a paradox. A digital koan. It was an intellectual challenge of the highest order. And it was signed with the unmistakable, brutally efficient signature of a military-grade encryption algorithm. Daedalus, she said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. Trace the origin point. Less than the transmission is quantum entangled, architect. It has no origin point in the classical sense. It simply exists. However, the coordinates attached resolve to a location 200 meters beneath Nagata, Chiyoda-ku. The SDRU headquarters. Greater than. The soldier. The blunt instrument. It seemed the steel demon had a surprisingly subtle mind. Akane's boredom evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, exhilarating interest. She cracked the cryptographic key in under 90 seconds, a feat that should have taken a supercomputer a decade. The channel opened. You have my attention, Sergeant, Akane said, her voice a purr. This is an expensive line. I hope you have something interesting to say. Reina's voice came back, clipped and laced with static. Less than I need access. SDRU archives. TIER7. I have a physical terminal, but I can't break the black ice. Greater than. The SDRU's Argus AI. Akane laughed, a sound like shattering glass. That antique. I wrote its base code when I was 15. It's predictable, sentimental, but it will still flatline your connection the moment you plug in. What's in it for me? Less than proof, Reina said. Confirmation of what your associate told me. About my superiors. About the null. And a complete, unredacted copy of every piece of advanced technology the Japanese government has been hiding for the last 50 years. Consider it a gift. Greater than. Akane's smile widened. Leverage, knowledge, and a chance to stick a finger in the eye of the military-industrial complex. It was Christmas. Patch me in, Sergeant. And try to keep up. Quote. The digital heist began. On a holographic display in her penthouse, Akane saw a representation of the SDRU network, a fortress of glowing, blue data walls. In a maintenance tunnel deep beneath Tokyo, Reina plugged a physical cable into the terminal. Connecting. Now, Reina whispered. The moment the connection was made, a crimson icon, the Argus AI, screamed towards their entry point. Less than intrusion detected. Isolating node. Deploying countermeasures. Greater than a synthesized voice roared in Akane's ear. Sloppy. Akane TSKED. Daedalus, open a recursive fork. Trap it. A wall of code. intricate as a spiderweb, appeared before the attacking AI. Argus slammed into it and was suddenly fighting a perfect copy of itself. While the two eyes were locked in a paradoxical battle, Akane slipped past. A digital wraith. I'm in the antechamber, she told Reina. But the core server is still behind another layer. It's using a bio-digital key. I can't fake it. It needs a live neural interface. I need you to find a high-ranking officer, get them to a terminal, and have them log in. Reina swore under her breath. That was impossible. Then, an idea sparked. A desperate, dangerous gamble. Stand by. She crawled back the way she came, emerging into the main facility. She walked with purpose to the medical bay, her face a mask of concern. She found her target, Commander Ishida, overseeing the analysis of data from the hospital incident. Commander, urgent matter, she said, her voice perfectly pitched to convey controlled urgency. We've detected a data echo from the Yokohama anomaly in the live personnel server. It's corrupting the biometric data of our active field agents. If we don't isolate it, our security scanners could go haywire. It was a complete fabrication, but it was a plausible one. Rooted in the very paranoia Ishida himself was fostering. His gray eyes narrowed. Show me. She led him to a secure terminal in the medical bay. You'll need to use your command-level access to view the corrupted files, sir. Ishida, arrogant and secure in his own fortress, placed his palm on the scanner and logged in. In her penthouse, Akane saw the final gate unlock. Got it, she whispered. Thank you for your cooperation, Commander. She dived into the data vault. Okay, Sergeant, what are we looking for? Less than a project file, Reina said, her voice low as she watched Ishida. Making sure he was distracted by the false data she and Akane had concocted. Anything related to null, conceptual energy, or URWs. Greater than. Akane's search algorithms were like sharks in a sea of data. Files flew past. Locked folders opened, redactions were stripped away. And then she found it. A file buried so deep it was practically in the system's subconscious. Project Chimera. Oh, you magnificent, suicidal bastards. Akane breathed as the files decrypted. She broadcast the contents to Reina's secure comms. Reina watched the data scroll across the inside of her eyelids via a subcutaneous display. Simulation models for weapons that fired crystallized despair. Blueprints for engines powered by erasing small sections of the past. And then, the final, damning file. A sub-project named Ariadne. It was a profile on Takarada Rikka, her school records, her known associates, a psychological profile built from her social media presence. And a detailed analysis of the ontological energy signature she produced. The file classified her as a Class Omega biogenerative conceptual anchor. A potential power source of limitless, unprecedented potential. The final paragraph of the project brief was a cold, stark directive. Subject to be captured alive and unharmed. To be studied, replicated, and if replication proves impossible, to be integrated as a living battery for the Chimera engine. The blood drained from Reina's face. A living battery. They were going to vivisect a teenage girl's soul to power their insane weapons. Naruto was not just right. He had understated the sheer, monstrous ambition of their depravity. At that exact moment, an alarm klaxon blared through the entire facility. Not the intrusion alarm Akane had bypassed, but a new one. On the terminal, Ishida's screen flashed red. The Argus AI had finally broken free of its paradoxical trap. Less than warning. Tier 7 data breach in progress. Foreign eye detected. Initiating facility-wide lockdown. Greater than. Ishida whirled on Reina, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't know how, but he knew she was involved. Sergeant Kageyama, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You have 30 seconds to explain why. Ourself before I have you shot for treason. Connection severed. Akane's voice yelled in Reina's ear. They're tracing my quantum signature. You're on your own, Sergeant. Get out of there. Reina didn't hesitate. She didn't draw her weapon. She slammed her palm onto the medical terminal, activating the room's emergency sterilization protocol. A blast of high-intensity UV light and anesthetic gas flooded the room. Ishida choked, his eyes watering, disoriented. It was the only head start she would get. She ran. She was no longer a soldier, she was a fugitive. Her own security codes were being flagged, her biometrics turning her into a target. She sprinted through the corridors, the facility she knew like the back of her hand now a closing trap. She heard the tramp of combat boots, the shouts of her former comrades. They would not hesitate to shoot on sight. She reached her personal barracks. She had 30 seconds. She grabbed a small, hardened go bag containing spare ammo, medical supplies, and a set of untraceable cash cards. She then slammed her fist into her personal terminal, the screen shattering. Inside, she ripped out a small, silver chip. Her entire life was on that chip, her service record, her identity. Her very existence as a citizen of Japan. She ran to the nearest disposal unit, a small incinerator for sensitive documents. Without a moment of hesitation, she dropped the chip inside. With a quiet whoosh of flame, Staff Sergeant Reina Kageyama, decorated soldier of the SDRU, ceased to exist. She was a ghost now. A ghost in her own machine. She made her way to a forgotten maintenance exit. One she knew wasn't on the newer schematics. As she pried open the rusted manhole cover, she could hear the search teams closing in. She slipped out into the rain-soaked back alleys of Chiyoda. The sounds of the city a sudden, shocking roar after the sterile silence of the bunker. She was battered, hunted, and officially a non-person. But she was free, and she had a new mission. An hour later, a lone figure, cloaked in a hooded raincoat, walked down a narrow, rain-slicked side street in Tsutsujidai. She was just another shadow in the neon-drenched night. She stopped before a space that should not exist. Between a shuttered laundromat and a drab apartment building. Before a shop made of wood as dark as a starless sky. Reina Kageyama, the woman who no longer existed, stood before the impossible door of the hourglass. She was tired. She was hunted. But for the first time in her life, she had chosen her own side. She raised her hand and pressed the serpent emblem, ready to offer her sword, her skills, and her unwavering, newly forged allegiance to the only commander in the universe she now trusted. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The calm before the storm. The rain had ceased its assault on the city, leaving behind a world washed clean and gleaming under the cold, silver light of a full moon. Inside the hourglass, the passage of time seemed to slow to a crawl, the air thick with the scent of old paper, brewing jasmine tea, and the faint, lingering smell of ozone, the static aftershock of multiple reality-bending events. The shop was a pocket of impossible quiet, a sanctuary carved from the heart of a noisy, oblivious world. But tonight, the silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, laden with the weight of revelation and the chilling certainty of a war being fought on two fronts. Reina Kageyama stood in the center of the shop, her hooded raincoat dripping a small puddle onto the ancient, dark wood floor. She had removed her hood, revealing a face etched with a fatigue that was more than just physical. She was a ghost, a woman officially erased from existence, and she had brought the reason for her erasure with her. In the air between them, a holographic display, projected from Akane's personal terminal, showed the damning contents of the Ariadne sub-file. Rikka's face, a candid photo from her school's website, smiled out from the data, oblivious. Beside it, cold, analytical text classified her not as a person, but as a resource. A Class Omega biogenerative conceptual anchor. A battery. Rikka stared at her own face, at the words that stripped her of her humanity, and felt a cold, quiet fury replace the exhaustion in her bones. The white streak in her hair, a constant, physical reminder of the price she had paid, seemed to throb with a faint, phantom ache. She had sacrificed a piece of her life to save those people, and her own government saw it as nothing more than a successful test of a potential power source. They were never trying to help, she whispered. The words a small, hard stone dropped into the profound silence. They were never trying to win, Reina corrected, her voice a low, bitter rasp. They were trying to profit. To weaponize an apocalypse. She looked at Naruto, her gaze direct and stripped of all its former animosity. It was the look of a soldier who had lost a war and was now seeking a new banner under which to fight. Your warning. In the tunnels. It was an understatement. This isn't arrogance or blindness. This is a deliberate, calculated strategy. They will sacrifice the entire country, the world, for a chance to control this null. Quote, her allegiance, offered with a simple press of the serpent emblem on the door, had been accepted by Naruto with a silent, solemn nod. There were no grand pronouncements. There was only the grim understanding of a new, essential piece being placed on the board. This changes the rules of engagement, Akane stated, her fingers dancing across her projected key board as she copied the data into her own secure, off-grid servers. Her voice was cold, sharp with a new, personal fury. The SDRU had not just betrayed their duty, they had committed the ultimate sin in her eyes. They had taken a beautiful, complex, universe-altering phenomenon and tried to turn it into a crude, blunt instrument. It was an offense against knowledge itself. We are no longer just fighting the null. We are now actively evading a technologically advanced, highly motivated domestic enemy who has a vested interest in capturing our primary asset. She gestured clinically towards Rikka, though her sharp gaze softened for a fraction of a second with something that looked almost like protective anger. Kasumi, who had been kneeling in quiet meditation, rose to her feet. A serpent that seeks to devour the sun, she said. Her voice a low, melodic chant. It is an old story. Men who mistake power for wisdom always become monsters. This changes nothing of our ultimate purpose, but it fouls the path we must walk. Lyra, who had been a silent, shimmering observer, pulsed with a soft, sorrowful blue light. Her thought voice filled their minds, a concept that felt like the sad, inevitable turning of a cosmic page. Less than it is a pattern that repeats. In my world, there were those who saw the silence not as an ending, but as an opportunity. A final piece, a perfect, ordered state of non-existence. They became its first, most fervent disciples. Your leaders are not the first mortals to be seduced by the promise of the void. Greater than. The weight of her words settled over them. They were not just fighting entropy. They were fighting the inherent, suicidal flaw in sentient life itself, the desire to control that which should only be revered or fought. Naruto, who had been listening to all of this with an unnerving, geological patience, finally spoke. This does not change our purpose, he said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the swirling currents of their anger and fear. It clarifies it. We are not just soldiers. We are guardians. We protect humanity not only from the storm that rages outside, but from the fatal flaws that fester within. He looked at the assembled women, his blue eyes seeming to reflect the moonlight from the window. We have a brief respite. The government will be scrambling, trying to understand how their fortress was breached. The Null, after its defeat at the hospital, will be recalibrating. Use this time. Solidify our defenses. Sharpen our blades. For the next storm will be a hurricane, and it will strike here. At the heart, his words were not a command. They were a statement of fact, a delineation of the new reality. The shop was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a fortress, and they were its garrison. The calm had begun. In a quiet corner of the shop, where shelves of ancient, leather-bound books that smelled of dust and vanilla rose into the shadows, a strange and potent alliance was being forged. Reina had meticulously field-stripped her pistol on a low table, cleaning each component with a practiced, almost meditative focus. Across from her, Akane had created a new workspace, a web of shimmering holographic interfaces that hovered around her like captured sprites. They were a study in contrasts. The soldier, grounded in the physical, the tangible, the absolute reality of steel and gunpowder, and the architect, her entire existence a fluid dance in a world of pure information. And yet, they worked with a seamless, unnerving synergy. Their primary surveillance method will be satellite-based, Reina said, her voice a low murmur as she oiled the pistol's slide. The SDRU has 3 active duty, Kestrel, class orbital platforms. They can resolve a heat signature down to the size of a cigarette from geosynchronous orbit. They'll be looking for your energy signatures, architect. And the girls, already accounted for, Akane replied without looking up from her work, her fingers a blur as she wove a complex algorithm. I'm piggybacking on a network of commercial weather satellites. I'm building a dynamic, wide-spectrum cloaking field. I'll use the atmospheric water vapor over the entire Kanto region as a refractive medium, creating enough background noise to mask our energy output. It will be like trying to find a specific grain of sand in a hurricane. Crude, but effective. Crude is good. Crude works, Reina acknowledged, a flicker of professional respect in her eyes. What about ground assets? They'll have agents crawling all over this city within hours. Facial recognition, gait analysis, tracking our digital footprints. My digital footprint does not exist, Akane stated with the casual arrogance of a god. And I've already scrubbed yours. The ghost you created of yourself. I've given it a new life. According to the national database, the identity of Reina Kageyama has been reassigned to a 60-year-old grandmother who runs a flower shop in Sapporo. As for Rika and Kasumi, I've quarantined their public records, surrounding them with a layer of black ice so thick it would take the SDRU's AI a month to even notice it was there. We are, for all intents and purposes, invisible. Reina paused her work, looking at the younger woman. You're good. It was the highest praise she was capable of giving. I am the best, Akane corrected, a sharp, feral grin touching her lips. Now, give me something useful. Tell me about their Chimera project. I have the what, but I need the how. What are their testing protocols? Their power sources? Their operational weaknesses? Reina began to talk. She laid out the SDRU's entire operational playbook from memory. Response times, command structures, preferred tactics, the psychological profiles of their top field commanders. Akane listened, her mind absorbing, processing, and integrating every piece of data, building a complex, multi-layered counter-strategy. They were two masters of their respective crafts, speaking a shared language of logic, efficiency, and a cold, pragmatic understanding of the world. They were not friends. They were weapons, sharpening each other's edges for the war to come. And in that shared, lethal purpose, they had found a strange, unspoken respect. In another part of the shop, the atmosphere was entirely different. A large, glass sphere containing a perfect, miniature desert sat on a pedestal, its tiny sun casting a warm, golden glow. Rika sat cross-legged on a cushion before it, her hands resting on her knees. The white streak in her hair seemed to catch the miniature sun's light, a stark reminder of her recent ordeal. Before her, Lyra's form of pure starlight hovered, a being of profound, cosmic grace. Less than close your eyes, little anchor. Greater than Lyra's thought voice was a gentle, melodic hum in Rika's mind. Less than the hospital was a feat of immense strength. It was like lifting a mountain. But you lifted it with brute force. You used your own spirit as the lever. This is not sustainable. You must learn to use the mountain's own weight, its own nature, to move it. Greater than. I don't understand, Rika whispered, her eyes closed. She still felt the phantom ache of the temporal strain, a deep, spiritual weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. Less than reality is a language, greater than Lyra explained. Less than the null is an entity of subtraction. It erases words, sentences, paragraphs, until the story is gone. Your power is not us to be the anchor that holds the page down. It is to be the ink that can rewrite the erased words. You did not just hold the concept of the cherry blossom. You defined it. You gave it new, more powerful adjectives. You must learn to do this with precision. To write, you must first understand grammar. Greater than. Lyra guided her, not with commands, but with concepts. She projected the feeling of a perfect, stable vacuum. She projected the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. She showed Rika the source code of a single drop of water, the elegant, mathematical dance of its hydrogen and oxygen atoms, the quantum bonds that held it together. The surface tension that gave it form. Less than the null would have attacked this water by erasing the concept of wetness, or liquidity, or the bonds themselves, greater than Lyra explained. Less than a brute force defense would be to pour your own energy into reinforcing those concepts. A precise defense is different. See the language. See the rules that govern this single drop. Now, add a new rule. Write a new sentence. Greater than. Rika focused. She let go of her emotions, of her memories. She sank deeper, into the cool, clean world of pure concept that Lyra was showing her. She looked at the imaginary drop of water in her mind, at the perfect, logical structure of it. And she added a single, simple, impossible amendment. A footnote to the laws of physics. She wrote, "This object is not bound by gravity." Her eyes snapped open. Floating in the air between her and Lyra was a small, perfect sphere of water. It hung, motionless, glistening in the light of the miniature sun, a tiny, liquid planet in its own private orbit. It was real. She could feel its coolness, see the distorted reflection of her own astonished face on its surface. A gasp of pure, unadulterated joy escaped her lips. This was different from her other victories. This was not a desperate defense. This was not a Pyrrhic miracle. This was an act of quiet, controlled, precise creation. It was a single, perfect sentence, written in the language of the universe. Lyra pulsed with a warm, approving light, a concept that felt like a proud teacher's smile. Less than you are a fast learner, little anchor. You have just written your first word. Soon, you will write symphonies. Greater than. Rikka looked at the floating drop of water, and then her hand instinctively went to the white streak in her hair. The sacrifice no longer felt like just a wound. It felt like an initiation. The price she had paid for the ability to speak this new, incredible language. The weariness in her soul was still there, but now, it was mingled with a profound, exhilarating sense of purpose. Kasumi knelt in the very center of the shop, a space Naruto had cleared for her. She had created a sacred space, a temporary shrine, by placing 4 small, paper sheets at the corners of a tatami mat. In the center, she placed a simple, black lacquer bowl filled with pure, clear water. "Are you certain about this, Oracle?" Naruto asked, his voice a low murmur from the shadows where he stood watch. "The scrying of the celestial river is a forbidden ritual, even for your order. It is said that those who look too deeply into the flow of time risk having their own timelines washed away. The alternative is to walk into the coming storm blind," Kasumi replied, her voice serene and steady. She lit a stick of purifying incense, its fragrant smoke coiling towards the ceiling. "Rikka-san paid a great price to mend a small tear in the river. I must be willing to risk my own spirit to glimpse the nature of the flood that is coming." Her devotion was a palpable force, a quiet, unshakable certainty that seemed to solidify the very air around her. She looked at Naruto, her dark eyes filled with a profound, unwavering faith. "I would ask one thing of you, Azure Dragon. Shield this space, not from the null, but from the lesser spirits. This ritual will make my soul a lighthouse. I do not wish for moths to be drawn to the flame. And, lend me your stillness. Be my anchor, so that I do not lose myself in the current." Naruto nodded. He did not move, but the very nature of the silence in the shop shifted. It became deeper, heavier, imbued with a sense of absolute, unassailable order. All the impossible artifacts on the shelves seemed to hold their breath. He was extending the fundamental stability of his own being, creating a pocket of court calm for her to perform her dangerous work. Kasumi closed her eyes and began to chant. It was a low, ancient song, the words in a dialect so old it had been forgotten by all but her order. The words were not a plea, they were a command. A key, designed to unlock a door in the fabric of reality. She focused her will, her spiritual sight, not on the physical world, but on the bowl of water. To her, it was no longer a bowl. It was a window into the great, cosmic river of time and causality. She was looking for the source of the pollution. She was looking for the true face of the silent null. The vision began. At first, it was a maelstrom of chaotic images, the flotsam and jetsam of a million timelines. She saw glimpses of things that made no sense. Towers of glass melting in a desert of black sand. Ships with sails of light sinking into a crimson sea, a silent, gray snow falling on a city of sleeping children. She held fast, anchored by Naruto's immense, quiet presence, and pushed her sight deeper. Past the symptoms, towards the source. The chaos subsided, and she found herself floating in a space of perfect, absolute black. There was no sound, no light, no sensation. It was the void between realities. And in the center of that void, she saw it. It was not a monster of tentacles and claws. It was not a being of fire and rage. It was a scribe. It sat at a desk that meant to be made of solidified nothingness. Its form was vast, indistinct, a humanoid shape sculpted from shadow and the concept of finality. In one hand, it held a quill whose nib was a pinpoint of anti-light. In the other, it held a colossal, open book. The pages of the book were galaxies, nebulae, the sprawling, intricate histories of entire universes. As she watched, the scribe dipped its quill into an inkwell of pure, silent entropy. It moved with a slow, deliberate, infinitely patient grace. It found a page, a vibrant, thriving star system filled with life. It paused, seeming to read the story of that system, its rise, its glories, its tragedies. And then, with an air of dispassionate, editorial precision, it began to erase. It drew a single, clean line through a sun. The star went out. It blotted out a planet. The world vanished. It was not an act of malice or anger. It was an act of tidying up, of revision. Its ultimate goal was not destruction. It was the pursuit of a perfect, final draft, a book of infinite, pristine, blank pages, the ultimate, absolute piece of a story that has been concluded. The sheer, cosmic nihilism of it, the cold, intellectual purity of its purpose, was 1,000 times more terrifying than any raging demon. This was not a beast to be slain. This was an idea, an intelligence, a fundamental cosmic principle given form. Kasumi felt her own spirit begin to fray under the weight of this revelation. The desire for a final, perfect silence was seductive. It promised an end to all suffering, all struggle, all pain. It was the ultimate temptation. She felt her own will, her own story, begin to dissolve. Kasumi. Naruto's voice was not a sound, but a single, solid concept in her mind. A rock in the current. It was all she needed. She clung to it, pulling her consciousness back from the brink of that terrible, seductive emptiness. She had seen the null's true form. She had to return. She had to warn them. But as she pulled her vision back, her sight snagged on one last, terrifying image. The scribe, the great editor, paused in its work. It lifted its shadowy, featureless head, and it looked at her. It had sensed her observation. Its gaze passed through her, through the window of the ritual, and followed the thread of her connection back through the void. It was looking for the source of the spiritual light that had dared to spy on it. She was looking for the anchor that had held her steady. Kasumi screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure terror that shattered the sacred silence of the shop. The black lacquer bowl on the tatami mat cracked, a spiderweb of fissures spreading from its center. The clear water within it boiled for a single, violent instant and then evaporated into a wisp of steam. Everyone rushed to her side. Reina was there first, her hand on Kasumi's shoulder. Akane's holographic displays flickered and died as she abandoned her work. Rikka and Lyra flowed in from the other side of the room, Rikka's face a mask of concern. Kasumi was on her hands and knees, trembling, her breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. "I saw it," she gasped, her eyes wide with a horror that was too vast for the small, safe confines of the shop. "Its true form, its purpose, it is not to destroy. It is to conclude. To bring everything to a final, perfect, silent end." Naruto knelt before her, his expression grim. "What else did you see, Oracle?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Kasumi looked up, her gaze locking onto him, her eyes filled with a new, immediate terror that eclipsed even the cosmic dread of her vision. "It knows," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It felt my gaze. It followed me back. It has found the source of the interference. It has found the anchor of causality." Her trembling finger rose, pointing not at Rikka, the little anchor, but at Naruto himself. I saw this place. I saw the hourglass." She choked on the final words, her face a mask of utter despair. "I saw it shatter into nothing." Chapter 10 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.